Chapter 213. The so-called lycanthropes are made of children under the age of 10. Boiling water is poured over their skin, and the skin is peeled off bit by bit from the nape of their neck. Then, fresh wolf skin is immediately pasted on their bloody skin and wrapped in cloth, allowing them to grow together. At most, only 1 out of 10 will survive, and the only one that survives will have their tongue cut out and receive a long period of whipping and scolding. In the end, they will become livestock for others to order around and enslave, and will be pulled into a circus to perform. Ning Shu lowered her eyes and tried to speak in the most concise and calm manner possible. However, the people present, if they didn't already have children, then they had younger siblings or nephews at home. When they heard this, their hearts tightened. As long as they imagined their children falling into the hands of such a demon, they felt their entire body turn cold and their tears dry up. Old Princess Consort Yu stood by the Emperor's side. She couldn't bear to look away and let out a sympathetic sigh. The official from the Ministry of Revenue said, "Then what about the dead ones? How did he get rid of so many children's corpses without anyone noticing? Why didn't anyone notice anything strange and report it to the authorities? There are butchers everywhere in Yin Ma Alley, slaughtering pigs and sheep. The entire alley is filled with the smell of blood, and the old bloodstains on the ground are the best camouflage for him." In the 19th year of Heaven's selection, after his accomplice, group leader Sun, died, he stopped out of fear and cleaned up all the evidence, leaving only that thin handbook. Thus, I am unable to make an accurate judgment as to how he dealt with it. However, after His Highness sent people to investigate, they found that Feng San used horse peddling as a smokescreen. Other than selling so-called horses, he would occasionally sell some fresh horse meat. After hearing this, everyone present couldn't help but feel their stomachs churn. However, most of them felt fear and unease. On the steps, the Emperor's expression was extremely ugly. "Hehe, this is truly a pleasant surprise for us. I didn't expect that such a tragedy would happen in our imperial city, right under our eyes, and we were completely unaware. My beloved officials, you are all in charge of the Ministry of Justice, the Supreme Court, and some of you are even Yongchengwei. You are all my right-hand officials. You really have good eyesight." Wang Han and the others immediately kept quiet out of fear. Cold sweat silently soaked their backs. They were speechless. Even if Feng San dies 10,000 times, it won't be enough to appease the hatred in my heart. Pass down my orders. Drag Feng San out of the Meridian Gate and whip his corpse. Chop him up and feed him to the dogs in front of the commoners. As you command. Following Ning Shu's train of thought, Tan Siwei quickly came up with a conjecture. Could it be that the little wolf demon from the vaudeville troupe who died tragically 9 years ago, was killed by Miss Qi because she mistook it for a real demon, was related to Mother Hui? Yes. Previously, I had always focused my suspicions on Caiu, Liu Jin, and other people who had lost their children at home, thinking that it was their revenge. It wasn't until yesterday that I inadvertently discovered the flaw in the fortune bag. When I passed by the CIU bureau, I suddenly had an idea, so on a whim, I rummaged through the CIU bureau's file room all night and finally found it. Mother Hui indeed didn't have a biological child, but more than 10 years ago, she had adopted a 3-year-old boy from the CIU bureau. That child's whereabouts had disappeared before you entered the Qi estate. Ning Shu stared at Mother Hui and spoke slowly. "Mother Hui, the CIU bureau scroll has your own handwriting. You can't deny it. You spent 9 years to complete the perfect revenge for your child. Everything that happened in the past is still pardonable, but now you really shouldn't implicate others. Please, admit it." Chapter 214. Everyone was curious about the truth, but they didn't expect it to be like this. 9 years ago, the child adopted by Mother Hui was kidnapped by that scum called Feng San and made into a lichen. Unexpectedly, he was lucky enough to escape death from Feng San, but died in the hands of 4th young Miss Qi. In order to avenge her child, Mother Hui planned for 9 whole years and also died tragically in front of everyone. Could this be what the heavens meant when they said that the heavens were good at reincarnation? In Xianqing Temple, everyone didn't know what to say. The whole place was silent, and even Lord Qi was stunned. The dark clouds above were heavy and had gathered for too long. At this time, it finally began to rain. The guards and eunuchs were stunned for a moment and immediately found canopies and umbrellas to block the rain for His Majesty and the other officials. Kneeling on the hard soil, a drop of rain fell on Mother Hui's eyelashes and slowly rolled down her old eyelids like a tear. In the sparse rain, Mother Hui tightly grasped the fortune bag in her hand and finally opened her mouth. Her eyes were red and bloodshot, but her voice was calm, as if her soul had already been pulled into the underworld and only this useless corpse was left in the human world. She spoke with a hoarse voice, pausing after each sentence. I entered the palace at the age of 11. According to the palace rules, I should have been released at the age of 25. Later, the imperial concubine in the palace said that I was efficient and capable, so she ordered me to serve in the palace for a few more years and help her train a few useful palace maids before releasing me. Thus, the imperial concubine said that I had to wait until I was 30 years old. At that time, women in ordinary families already had a group of children, and some were even about to become grandmothers. As for me, I was alone, and my only sister had already married far away. I spent 19 years in the palace. The moment I stepped out of the palace, I didn't even know where to go. Fortunately, the imperial concubine treated me well and gave me a lot of rewards before leaving the palace, so I didn't have to live on the streets. At first, I thought about whether I should find someone to marry. I didn't ask for anything else, just to have a companion for the rest of my life, to be able to talk to me. At my age, I can forget about joining a good family. At most, I will be a widower or a retired soldier. Unfortunately, it was too difficult. The matchmaker mentioned 3 or 4 candidates for me. They were either gamblers, drunkards, or hot-tempered men who beat their wives away. I looked at each other for a while and gradually gave up on the idea. But do you know? Living alone was too lonely. Every day, from morning to night, I would watch the sun rise and set by myself. The houses next to me would be filled with laughter, while my small courtyard would be completely silent except for the chirping of insects. It was as quiet as a grave in the wilderness. Later on, with the help of others, I began to visit the various noble families to educate their young ladies. At first, I was quite happy doing it, but later on, I looked at those little children who were emitting a milky fragrance, soft and cute, and an uncontrollable desire grew in my heart. I don't want to get married anymore, but I really want to have a child of my own who can chat with me and relieve my boredom. That way, when I'm old, I won't have to worry about where I die. But where can I get a child? Later on, I thought of the CIU Bureau. You don't say, there were quite a few children there. Some were abandoned by their parents because they were sick, some were disabled and almost drowned, and some were too poor to raise them. I looked at those little children who were crying piteously for food and thought, if it was my child, I would rather die than let them live on the streets. Even if I had to feed them with my own blood, I would give them a way out. But fortunately, I also want to have a child of my own, one of them. At this point, a blissful smile appeared on Mother Hui's face. It was as if she had traveled through the river of time and returned to the past. With a nervous heart, she slowly and carefully walked towards the one who was fated to be with her. Since then, she was satisfied and thanked the heavens. She didn't ask for anything else. Chapter 215. His parents used to run a tofu shop. When he was still in his mother's womb, his father died of an illness. His biological mother was grieving and became ill after giving birth. She couldn't hold on for 2 years and died with him. When the neighbors found him, he was almost starved to death, so he was sent here. There were so many children in the CIU Bureau. They were either crying, fighting, playing, or trying to attract the attention of the mothers in the CIU Bureau or asking for food. He was the only one who sat alone in the courtyard and didn't say anything. He lowered his head and looked at the grass sprouts on the ground. The moment I saw him, I knew it was him. So I walked over, took his soft little hand, and brought him home. I changed his name to an I didn't have any other wishes. I just wanted him to grow up without illness or disaster and become a healthy ordinary person. I wanted him to do some small business or travel around. I just wanted him to be safe and happy in this life. My little was so sensible that it made my heart ache. When he saw that I was tired from work, He would stand on the stool and tiptoe to pour me tea. When my waist injury recurred on a rainy day, he would take the initiative to massage my back and waist. When he went out, he never said that he wanted to buy snacks or toys. He said that it wasn't easy for his mother to earn money, so he had to be frugal. Although I didn't have enough money to hire the best teacher for him, I had learned some superficial knowledge in the palace. So I taught him word by word. I didn't expect my little to be so hardworking. He immediately learned a word after being taught once. He could memorize a poem after hearing it once. Sometimes I thought, could it be that God wanted me to suffer for half of my life just to wait for this little baby? It wasn't that he found a way to live for me. It was because I had him that I finally had a home. So I poured my heart and soul into him. I taught him all the great principles that the grand tutors taught the princes in the palace. I taught him to be courteous, to be a gentleman. I taught him to be diligent and to not be arrogant. I taught him to be self-reliant and to be kind to others. I spent a whole 5 years raising my little into a well-educated and modest gentleman. Until that day, when I came home from work and opened the door, he was gone. More and more raindrops pattered on her face and body, also drenching the bag in her hand. Deep red marks fell one after another, like drops of blood that had just flowed out. I searched like a madman. I searched street after street, knocked on door after door. I didn't know how many days and nights I searched, but my was gone just like that. I went to the government office to report it, but they told me that with so many children missing every year, it was too difficult to find them. But how can I give up? The Jingji government was unwilling to pay attention to me, so I went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said that they were not in charge of me, so I went to the Ministry of Revenue. Later on, those officials avoided me as soon as they saw me. Some people advised me not to look for another one and to adopt another one from the CIU Bureau. But how could they know that my little was a treasure that God had taken pity on me and bestowed upon me with great difficulty? I looked for her for half a year. Just when I was about to lose all hope, I found her. That day, when I was walking on the street with an portrait, I accidentally saw someone holding a piece of calligraphy. There were 2 auspicious words written on it. When I saw it, my heart trembled. In this world, I can't recognize anyone's calligraphy, but I can recognize this one at a glance. Because I held his soft little hand and personally taught him each stroke. I immediately asked where the calligraphy came from, but that person said that it was written by some wolf demon. With a body full of doubts and incomparable expectations, I went to look for that vaudeville troupe. But I was late, just a few hours late. When I found him, he had already been beaten to death. His little body was stuffed into a cloth bag and casually thrown on the side of the road. When I opened it, Mother Hui closed her eyes tightly and wailed silently. My little who was as obedient as a little fairy child, had already turned into a rotten mess. Chapter 216. After living in hell for a long time, one's body would become numb from cultivation and would no longer feel pain. However, she was suddenly sent to heaven and tasted sweetness. Before she had enough, she was kicked down from the heavens. The pain was like numerous needles, each piercing deeply into her bones, making her unable to pull them out and unable to die. She could only cry and roll around in the dead of night, draining every drop of her tears. Lord Qi let out a crazy roar from between his teeth. So from then on, you planned your revenge and schemed to sneak into my Qi residence to kill my So what if I did? Mother Hui sneered and raised her head, fearlessly meeting his murderous gaze. With the same hateful gaze, she said, why should your child be able to trample on other people's lives at will and still be able to peacefully enjoy wealth and splendor, while my child can only be bullied and defiled, dying tragically on the crowded streets? I waited for more than 30 years for a treasure and a home, but it was all destroyed by you. You didn't teach your own daughter well and indulged her into becoming a devil. Then let me kill this devil. I've been suffering all these years, and now you've finally tasted it. Does it feel good? Lord Qi, do you feel good? You. Lord Qi pointed at her angrily, his entire body trembling. Immense sorrow drowned him, making him unable to say a word. He only felt anger, absurdity, and confusion. Ning Shu said in a low voice, You killed leader Sun and Feng-san? In the pouring rain, Mother Hui laughed heartily, laughing so loudly. She was not afraid of everyone's gaze, nor was she afraid of the swords and spears in the hands of the imperial guards. She supported herself with one hand on the wet soil and staggered to her feet. Yes, I killed them all. After I buried my with my own hands, I couldn't sleep night after night. Every time I closed my eyes, I seemed to hear my crying in my ear. He said that he was in pain, that his entire body was in pain, and that he died unjustly. As his mother, how can I not avenge him? The first person I found was the fourth young miss of the Qi family, who directly killed my By chance, I heard that the Qi family was looking for an etiquette instructor for her, so I used my former connections to find a way to get someone to recommend me to Lord Qi. From there, I successfully entered the Qi family and came to the side of this little murderer. I wasn't in a hurry to make a move. Instead, I quietly watched from the sidelines as I searched for news about Leader Sunday. As a woman, I can't compare to a man in terms of strength, so I have to wait for the best opportunity to make a move. I spent 3 years investigating troop leader Sun thoroughly. Then, I set up a trap and lured him to a desolate mountain alone. When he wasn't paying attention, I stabbed him in the throat with a knife and made it look like he was bitten by a wild beast. This way, the authorities wouldn't suspect me. Then, I continued to investigate and finally found that scum, Feng-san. After I drugged and tied him up, I asked him why he wanted to harm my Do you know what he said? He said, who told that bastard to take the initiative to run to his side and tell the stall owner that he wanted to buy 2 pieces of sugar cake? He looked fair and obedient, so it was easy to deceive him. If I didn't tie him up, who else would I tie up? When I heard that, my heart was about to break. That day, I realized that he had always been afraid that I would be worried when I was working outside, so he never went out alone. The only time he sneaked out was on the day he lost it. It was because he wanted to buy me my favorite candy cake because my birthday was on that day. Therefore, I returned everything that scum had done to my back to him. When I heard his miserable screams, my heart was filled with joy. Qi Jianyu was tied up by me and watched everything with her own eyes. She watched me peel off his skin and stuff it into his mouth. She watched me sew the wolf skin inch by inch on his body. Sure enough, she was scared out of her wits. She went completely crazy. You all know what happened next, so I don't need to waste my breath. Today, I finally avenged my If you want to kill me or cut me up, come at me, haha, I'm not afraid. Chapter 217. The heavy rain continued to pour down, drenching the old woman. Her eyes were burning like a stubborn pheasant, welcoming death with its head held high. Ning Shu looked at her with a complicated expression. Her heart was filled with sour emotions, causing her to turn her head away. Tan Siwei's doubts were still not completely resolved. He frowned and asked, if she did all these things, then how did fourth miss get burned to death just now? Even Lord Qi himself testified that Mother Hui was always by fourth miss's side and had no chance to do anything. Also, concubine Qi clearly poured water, so how did fourth miss catch fire? I really don't understand this. Ning Shu said softly, I said that she did do something, but she wasn't the only one. This seemingly mysterious and strange thing actually only required the cooperation of 2 people. Forsythia, bring the golden spirit with the holy water and let the officials smell it. Forsythia immediately did as she was told. An official with a sensitive nose quickly smelled something strange. He frowned and asked curiously, why does this golden spirit smell like garlic? It's not the smell of garlic, but the smell of phosphorite. It's a very difficult thing to preserve, so it usually needs to be placed in water. Once exposed to the air and exposed to direct sunlight or high temperatures, it will spontaneously ignite and create sparks. The green will-o'-the-wisps around the tomb on a summer night were caused by this thing. Moreover, this thing is white or slightly yellow. If it's placed in the golden spirit, it's hard to tell if it's in the water if you don't look carefully. At that time, the Taoist priests sprinkled a lot of cinnabar and black dog's blood around fourth miss's body. Thus, it was an excellent camouflage. Tan Siwei thought for a moment and asked, but even if the phosphorite was sprinkled on fourth miss's body and caused sparks, Wouldn't the sparks be extinguished by the water that was sprinkled on her body at the same time? Then we have to mention the other arrangement that Mother Hui had carefully set up. Ning Shu brought over the copper plate that contained Qi Zhuanyu's charred flesh and clothes to His Majesty. My daughter was born with a sensitive nose. Just now, when I was examining fourth Miss's body, I suddenly smelled a little saltpeter on her body. After careful examination, I finally discovered the mystery. If my guess is correct, fourth young Miss clothes actually have a compartment that contains several kinds of things, namely quicklime, saltpeter, sulfur powder, and charcoal. When the water from the golden sage sprinkled down, the quicklime in the interlayer of the clothes immediately absorbed the water and released a large amount of heat, which in turn helped the phosphor stone to burn even faster. When the phosphor stone sparked, it immediately ignited several other things in the interlayer. When those things were mixed together, they were equivalent to a powerful piece of gunpowder. From then on, it was out of control, and the fourth young Miss was completely set on fire. I have to say, Mother Hui, you're too smart. When I went to the storeroom to look through the brocade boxes, you used a similar trick, didn't you? It's just that you've already used the same trick once. You really shouldn't use it a second time. When Ning Shu's voice fell, everyone couldn't help but be stunned. No one would have thought that such a vulgar and lowly-looking old woman would actually painstakingly plan such an unimaginable trick just to avenge her adopted son who had no blood relations with her. Lord Qi muttered, "It's her, it's her." No wonder when Zhuanyu got off the sedan chair, she deliberately put this piece of clothing on Zhuanyu. I thought she was worried that the altar would be too cold and cause Zhuanyu to catch a cold. So that's how it is, I actually allowed her to murder my daughter right under my nose. Lord Qi raised his hand and slapped himself hard on the face. He was sobbing uncontrollably as tears and snot flowed down his face. Mother Hui's face revealed a cold sneer. She silently raised her head and looked at the sky, as if her obedient and cute little one was smiling and waving at her from the sky. Chapter 218. Looking at this old woman who was like an ant, the emperor's eyes darkened. Everyone was silent. After a while, the emperor suppressed his anger and asked, "Then why did you frame concubine Qi?" Mother Hui sneered, "Concubine Qi is the Qi family's biggest support. Without her protection, how could Lord Qi have the guts to indulge his daughter to the point of killing people on the street? How could Qi Zhuanyu be so cruel and unreasonable, beating and killing her servants? Her Qi family deserves to be reduced to such a state." "Shut up. How dare you?" Wang Han looked at the emperor's expression and immediately reprimanded, "Then who are your accomplices? Hurry up and tell us the truth." Mother Hui shook her head firmly, "You don't have to look for them. There is no one else. I did everything alone. I spent 8 years to gain the trust of everyone in the Qi family. That day, after I helped Qi Zhuanyu into the hall to rest, I used the excuse of tidying up the silk satin to drug her, tie her into a brocade box, and drag her out. Then, I took a soft pillow and stuffed it under the blanket to make it look like someone was sleeping. As for the hair that old consort you saw, it was a wig that I had prepared beforehand. After old consort you left, I took the opportunity to light the sleeping incense to knock out the other 5 people. Then, I secretly took out the wig and stuffed it into the washtub. Then, I restored the room to its original state. When the others woke up, I also pretended to wake up with them. It was a very short time, so no one suspected me. After the incident, the Imperial Guards turned the entire fragrant hall upside down, but no one thought to look for that stinky washtub. Naturally, I had plenty of time and opportunity to quietly deal with it. Ning Shu knew that Mother Hui obviously wanted to take all the blame by herself, but there were too many flaws in her words. Ning Shu couldn't help but sigh softly and say in a low voice, "Mother Hui, even if according to what you said, fourth Mrs. disappearance was caused by you alone, you are just an old palace maid who left the palace. What ability do you have to sneak into the Imperial Astronomer to be a ghost on the signature? Also, Feng-san is tall and strong, and there is also Qi Zhuanyu. How could you deal with the 2 of them at the same time? Also, I roughly estimated that we would need at least 5 people to work together to replace Hua Jian in Weiyang Palace. If you don't have anyone to help you, you won't be able to complete such a huge plan by yourself." Mother Hui stiffened, but she still straightened her neck and said, Feng San and Qi Juanyu, that's because I drugged them beforehand. Naturally, they didn't have the ability to resist. As for the Imperial Astronomer's divination stick, that was the will of the heavens. I was just following the heavens' will and made another one to scare her. I've already said that this matter has nothing to do with anyone else. If you want to kill someone, then kill me, then this king will kill you, you bitch. Hearing the news, Xiao Yun Su hurriedly rushed over. After visiting Imperial concubine Qi, he held a sword and angrily pushed through the crowd. Seeing that he was about to swing his sword and chop off Mother Hui's head, the guards beside him hurriedly stepped forward to stop him. However, they couldn't stop Xiao Yun Su from howling in grief and indignation. My precious cousin actually died in the hands of a slut like you. And my imperial concubine mother. Imperial father, I just went to visit imperial concubine mother. She already can't recognize me. I beg imperial father to tear her into pieces and kill all 9 generations of her family. Hurried gasps could be heard behind the curtain of rain. Everyone looked at each other in dismay. No one dared to make a sound. No one would have thought that after the previous 4th young miss of the Qi dynasty, that gorgeous concubine Qi, who was like an undefeated flower, would finally step onto the path of madness after personally burning her own niece to death with a cup of holy water. After Ning Shu heard that imperial concubine Qi was also delirious, the ominous premonition in her heart reignited. From the moment the imperial astronomer's divination revealed the appearance of the first divination stick, every event and every scene quickly flashed through her mind. She suddenly raised her head and looked at Mother Hui, who wasn't surprised at all. Her gaze then searched for another face that was as silent as water. From the beginning to the end, a total of 2 divination sticks had appeared. Didn't that mean? Ning Shu's heart thumped. She immediately said, Your Majesty, Imperial concubine Qi might be in danger. Chapter 219. What? His Majesty's face turned green when he heard this. His bright yellow dragon robe flew in the wind. He immediately rushed to the quiet room where Imperial concubine Qi was temporarily placed. But before he stepped into the room, he heard a few terrified screams coming from inside. Ah, poisonous bees. Niang Niang. The head eunuch's expression changed. He immediately blocked in front of His Majesty. Guards. Protect the Emperor. Imperial guards, go save Niang Niang. Mother. Xiao Yun Su roared and wanted to rush in. But he was knocked back by the eunuch who was running for his life. The quiet room was a mess. Countless poisonous bees buzzed and flapped their wings. They flew towards the palace maids and eunuchs who were serving inside. They stabbed their poisonous stingers into their flesh, causing them to roll on the ground and scream miserably. Some of them even died. There were even more poisonous bees that flew out from the open door and rushed towards the guards and officials. Ning Shu picked up the corpse of a poisonous bee and carefully examined it. It really was a ghost head bee. Everyone in Xianqing Temple was in danger. Everyone was hiding and running for their lives as if they were in purgatory. Only in the heavy rain, Mother Hui laughed wildly. Ha 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 ha. Retribution our retribution. Ha 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 ha. Ning Shu turned to look at her and slowly pursed her lips. Her premonition was right. From the beginning to the end, there were 2 cursed sticks. They were not repeated threats. One stick represented Qi Juanyu and the other one represented Imperial concubine Qi. Their goal had always been these 2 people. They would not let either one go. Use fire. Ning Shu shouted with all her might. But the rain was too loud. Her voice had long been drowned out by the panicked screams and cries. She bit her lower lip and quickly looked around. Soon, her eyes fell on the large basin of firewood in the middle of the execution field that had not been completely extinguished by the rain. She did not care about anything else. She immediately picked up a torch and covered her face with her sleeves. She burned it towards the door of the quiet room where the poisonous bees were still flying out. Before she could run to the door, the back of her neck was suddenly grabbed by a hand. A familiar voice sounded in her ear. It had a rare anger. Do you want to die? Or do you think too highly of yourself and think you have 9 lives? Ning Shu turned around and saw that it was indeed Xiaoho Qing. She couldn't help but exclaim in surprise, "Your Highness." Xiahou Qing's face was calm and he ignored her. He pulled her behind him with one hand and said to the side, "Hui Mo, Juicy, go." Hui Mo immediately took out 2 torches from the brazier and gave one to Ju Sai. Then, he took out a bottle of wine from his arms and poured it into his mouth. He spat the small flame that was still wet from the rain. The flame suddenly burst into a raging fire. Pulling Forsythia, who was screaming in the crowd, to the side, Hui Mo raised his eyebrows and smiled. He and Juicy leaped into the air. "Let's go." Some of the more brave and agile guards also started to learn from him. The noisy situation gradually came under control. By the time the imperial bodyguards risked their lives to rescue imperial concubine Qi, her body had already been pierced by several poisonous stings. There was even one on her face. The highly poisonous bee stings had pierced deeply into her cheeks, turning her flower-like face purple. She was as ugly as a ghost. Imperial concubine Qi covered her face and screamed crazily, "My face! My face!" The painful tears and snot completely trampled on her image as a beloved concubine. Xiao Yunsu went forward and hugged her. His eyes were blood red. "Quickly summon the imperial physician. Quickly." When the last poisonous bee's charred corpse fell to the ground, the emperor finally walked out of the circle of imperial guards. He glanced around and looked at his embarrassed officials and his beloved concubine who had been poisoned. His chest heaved up and down violently. "Who can tell me, who did this?" The surviving palace maid knelt on the ground and sobbed in horror. "It's eunuch Jingzhong." When he was serving imperial concubine Qi, he suddenly released a large bag of poisonous bees from his arms. "It was too sudden. None of us expected him to do that. Where is that bastard now? Catch him for me. Here." But he's already. A eunuch, his entire body trembling with fear, pointed at Jingzhong, who was lying on his back in the corner, facing the heavens. A dagger had pierced deeply into his chest, and blood flowed all over the ground. There were also several wounds on his body from being stung by poisonous bees, but his face carried the most satisfied smile in the world. Chapter 220. Everyone in the palace knew that Jingzhong was Consort Qi's most trusted eunuch. No matter where she went, she would bring him along to serve her, just like her most loyal dog. However, no one had expected that this old dog would choose to perish together with its master in such a way. But why? There were tens of thousands of eunuchs and palace maids in the imperial palace. They were like ants in a crack in the wall. How much effort would a lowly and disabled eunuch have to spend, and how much luck would he have to accumulate before he could gain the favor of a queen in the imperial palace and become the head eunuch of the imperial palace? Especially when he was following Consort Qi, who had been favored for many years. For a eunuch, this was already a great blessing. How many people were envious? But this Jingzhong eunuch did such a foolish thing. Could it be that he had been possessed by a ghost? Amidst the sighing and confused discussion, Xiahou Qing calmly opened his mouth and casually recounted Jingzhong's life. Jingzhong eunuch, originally surnamed Chen, was from the capital. When he was 12 years old, his father died and his mother was seriously ill. His family was poor and unable to continue, so he voluntarily entered the palace and became a eunuch. At first, he worked as an odd-job worker in the imperial kitchen for 3 years. Later, he offended the head steward of the imperial kitchen and was sent to the imperial horse park to clean horse manure. During an autumn hunt, he risked his life to save Consort Qi, whose horse had fallen from a fright. Because of this, he was recognized and served in the Qian palace. After a moment of shock, Wang Han slowly came back to his senses. He asked in surprise, "Every year, there are many eunuchs who enter the palace for similar reasons. What does this have to do with him persecuting Consort Qi?" Xiahou Qing curled his lips and lightly sneered. Before his family's accident, his ancestors had been running a tofu shop in the west of the city. "You say it has nothing to do with him?" Wang Han took a deep breath. Could it be that he actually... He didn't finish his sentence, but most of the people present were shrewd people. Just from these few words, they could guess the general situation. In the corner, Jingzhong eunuch's body lay facing the sky. His body had been stung by poisonous bees and pierced by blades. His body had also been trampled on when everyone was running for their lives. But the satisfied smile on his face did not fade even in death. Ning Shu quietly walked over, bent her knees, and gently closed his eyes that were not closed. Last night, she searched through the entire night and finally found the record of Mother Hui's adoption. Beside the record, there were a few rough notes about an Er's family background. It mentioned that he once had an elder brother. Therefore, Ning Shu immediately begged Xiahou Qing to investigate further. Sure enough, they found something. The Chen family in the west of the city had made a living by selling tofu for generations. Although they were not rich, they were still able to get by. Until their father suddenly fell seriously ill and passed away, their mother was still pregnant. She washed her face with tears every day. Because of her grief, she fell ill during childbirth and had no money to treat her. Their younger brother was still in his infancy. The slender 12-year-old boy had no choice but to send himself to the palace in exchange for 20 taels of life-saving money to save the lives of his sick mother and younger brother. Unfortunately, his sacrifice didn't get him anything in return. His mother was bedridden for 2 years and finally passed away. As for his younger brother, he was lucky enough to be adopted by Mother Hui. In the end, he also died tragically on the streets. In the dead of night, he looked at his incomplete body and looked at the merciless moon and sky above his head. When he looked back, his enemy was living the most extravagant life in the world in the palace filled with flowers. How did this former boy spend every day and night in torment? He cried silently in the middle of the night. After dawn, he had to show the most respectful smile and kneel at the feet of his enemy to serve him wholeheartedly. He played the role of the most loyal dog to gain the trust of his master. Finally, after so many years of enduring, he had waited for this day. Chapter 221. Tan Siwei lowered his head and furrowed his brows. So you're saying that the cursed lot that the imperial astronomer divined a few days ago was also his doing? Ning Shu said, it should be him. But that day, there were a total of 8 people who followed Consort Chi's orders to collect the lot. How did he do something to the lot in front of everyone? Could it be that there's something wrong with the box? This is actually a very simple trick. Many trick stalls are proficient in it. It's hard to explain in a short time. Lord Tan, please bring out a locked box and I'll demonstrate it to everyone. Tan Siwei quickly ordered someone to bring out a brocade box. Ning Shu thanked him and opened the box in front of everyone. Your Majesty, please look carefully. She casually pulled out a hairpin from her hair and placed it in the brocade box. Then, she said to Tan Siwei, Lord Tan, please personally close the box and lock it. Tan Siwei did as he was told and the bronze lock clicked into place. Ning Shu said again, Lord Tan, please open the lock again. Tan Siwei nodded. However, something surprising happened. After the brocade box was opened, it was empty. The hairpin that Ning Shu had casually put in had disappeared like a puff of smoke. This Ning Shu raised her sleeve and the hairpin that had disappeared magically appeared in her palm. Ning Shu said slowly, Lord Tan, you casually found this box just now. I didn't have the opportunity to do anything to it. However, no one saw that when I was putting the hairpin into the box, I secretly wrapped a transparent thread around the end of the hairpin. It wasn't noticeable in the dark-colored box. Moreover, it was dark and raining heavily that night. Lightning flashed and thunder roared, causing people's hearts to palpitate. No one was able to discover that cobweb-like thread. When Lord Tan closed the box, there was a momentary blind spot. I immediately took the opportunity to pull out the thread. At this moment, my daughter was holding the brocade box for Lord Tan with both hands. My daughter's wide sleeves happened to cover the change that happened in that instant. When the box was closed and Lord Tan was busy locking it, he did not realize that there was nothing left in the box. My daughter had only practiced for a few short days. Eunuch Jingzhong should have already made plans, so his movements would only be faster and more seamless than my daughter's. A similar method can also make an originally empty brocade box suddenly produce a talisman. At this point, the cursed talisman, the disappearance of the living people in the fragrant hall, and the burning of the cup of water were all solved. However, no one present felt happy. They only had mixed feelings. Your Majesty, please save me. Queen Mother of the West, Jade Emperor, please save me. It hurts. Concubine Chi's screams of pain rang out beside their ears. It was heart-wrenching, and her image was completely destroyed. Many people who had been implicated for no reason were rolling on the ground in pain and wailing. His Majesty glared angrily at Jing Zhong's body. The antidote. Go to that castrated man and find the antidote. However, even after the guards searched Jing Zhong's body, they still couldn't find any trace of the antidote. What about Mother Hui? Where is she? She is an accomplice. She must know. The guards immediately turned around to get Mother Hui. However, before they could touch Mother Hui's sleeves, they saw that she suddenly tore open the old fortune bag in her hand and stuffed everything in the bag into her mouth. Then, she smiled proudly at everyone, wiped her mouth, and fell to the ground with a plop. She foamed at the mouth and soon stopped breathing. Amidst the exclamations, Hui Mo immediately ran over to open her mouth and checked her neck and nose. He was stunned. Ning Shu hurried forward. What happened? What did she eat? Hui Mo looked at Mother Hui, who had fallen into the black pond. Her face turned from green to purple, and finally returned to the black of death. Hui Mo was stunned and turned his head away. A lot of oleander powder and arsenic. One lick will kill her. She is already useless. Chapter 222. Wake up. You old thing, wake up for this prince and tell me where the antidote is. Xiao Yun Su stabbed his sword towards Mother Hui's corpse to vent his anger, but Hui Mo blocked it without batting an eyelid. Ning Shu whispered, Your Highness, she's already dead. Even if you cut her body to pieces, it'll be useless. Xiao Yun Su's veins popped out as he furiously roared, Then what about my mother? You bunch of trash. Where's the Imperial Physician? Why hasn't the Imperial Physician come yet? Imperial Dr. Zhong and Imperial Dr. Wang, who accompanied them, rushed over after hearing the summons. After checking the corpse of the poisonous bees on the ground and the poisoning symptoms of Imperial Concubine Chi and more than a dozen other officials, cold sweat came out from their foreheads. Their faces looked very ugly. They looked at each other and swallowed their saliva. They trembled as they reporting to Your Majesty, Your Highness. The poison that Imperial Concubine Chi and the other officials were poisoned with is something unique to the southern border ghost head bee. This bee is extremely poisonous. I've only seen it a few times in medical books, but I've never seen it before. I really can't cure it. Then immediately send someone to bring the antidote from the southern border to this prince. Cold sweat dripped onto the ground as the Imperial physicians prostrated themselves on the ground and stammered, From the time this poison is poisoned to the time of death, the longest is 3 to 5 days, and the shortest is 20 hours. Imperial Concubine Chi's body has been stung by poisonous bees the most, and the poison has already entered her heart meridians. The distance from the southern border to the capital is several thousand li. In addition, the terrain there is dangerous and miasma blocking the way. I'm afraid that by the time the antidote arrives, Imperial Concubine Chi and the other Daran will already have. Your Highness, please punish us. There were nearly 100 people who were poisoned and injured. After hearing the Imperial physician's words, their faces turned ashen and they let out a dying cry. Some of them were officials from the Supreme Court and Ministry of Justice who were summoned today to help solve the case. Some of them were palace maids and eunuchs who accompanied the emperor. There were also many Taoists from Shenqing Temple who were implicated. Even Lord Qi, who had just lost his daughter, was stung by the poisonous bee due to excessive grief. One of his arms had turned black. Ning Shu looked at these desperate and empty faces and her heart filled with complex emotions. She let out a light sigh and whispered to Xiahou Qing, Your Highness, the person that my daughter asked you to find, have you found the whereabouts? Xiahou Qing stood with his hands behind his back and slightly lowered his head in her direction. He coldly raised his eyebrows. What? Do you have doubts about my ability? As soon as Ning Shu heard this, she knew there was hope. She hurriedly offered flattery and smoothed out this ancestor's anger. I wouldn't dare. Your Highness is smart and capable and extraordinary. How could my daughter dare to have the slightest doubt about Your Highness? This journey has been hard on Your Highness. I will remember this in my heart. Ha! Xiahou Qing sneered in response to her deliberate flattery. He gently played with the finger bone in his hand and casually said, "Juicy, bring the person over." Ning Shu smiled and gave her thanks. Then she lowered her head and took a deep breath. Xiahou Qing's clear and indifferent voice sounded in her ear. "What are you afraid of? With me here, even if the sky falls, it won't smash you to death." Her heart that had been in the air seemed to have found a backer and landed steadily on a slow cloud. Ning Shu couldn't help but curve her lips and raise her head. At this time, her eyes were clear as if they had just been washed by water. Her gaze was steady and powerful. She stepped forward and curtsied to the emperor. In a clear voice, she said, "Your Majesty, my daughter knows who has the antidote." Chapter 223. For a moment, countless pairs of expectant eyes landed on her. Bearing so many expectant and hesitant gazes, Ning Shu's voice was like a green sparrow, flapping its wings powerfully. "This humble daughter and His Highness the Crown Prince have already thoroughly investigated this matter. However, the details are closely related to the secret affairs of the imperial harem and cannot be revealed to outsiders. Your Majesty, please allow the irrelevant people to leave and this humble daughter will tell you the truth." The emperor narrowed his eyes suspiciously. However, the situation was urgent and there was no other choice. The emperor waved his sleeves and ordered the imperial guards to clear out all the irrelevant people present. The injured people were dragged into the surrounding rooms and their eyes and ears were closed. Very quickly, only a few dozen of His Majesty's trusted aides and Xiao Yunsu's group were left in the training hall. Old Princess Yu had experienced the terrifying storm just now and was so frightened that her face was pale. She clutched her chest and coughed repeatedly. Thus, she volunteered herself. "Your Majesty, this old one originally wanted to come and help, but I didn't expect to encounter such a thing right after. Your Majesty, official matters are more important. This old one won't cause trouble here." His Majesty nodded and said patiently, "Take care, Imperial sister-in-law. Zhao Bin, personally escort Imperial sister-in-law back to the residence." Chief Eunuch Zhao Bin immediately received the order. Just as old Princess Yu turned around, a gentle and clear voice sounded from behind her. "Old Princess Yu, please wait." Old Princess Yu's footsteps paused. Looking at her old and haggard figure, Ning Shu slowly said, "Mother Hui and Eunuch Jingzhong have already taken their revenge and the results you wanted have also been achieved. However, everyone else present is innocent and should not be buried with your anger and hatred. Please, take out the antidote." Old Princess Consort Yu slowly turned around and looked at her with her eyes that were muddled from old age. "Haha, what are you talking about? What antidote? Why can't this old one understand? Or is it that this old one's eyes are really muddled and I heard wrongly? You understand." Ning Shu's voice wasn't loud, but it was powerful. "My daughter just said that this case was completed by a group of people from the beginning to the end. Among them, Eunuch Jingzhong and Hui Mema have already surfaced, and Shen Xing, who tampered with the heir consort selection in Weiyang Palace, has already committed suicide. There's only one left, and also the most important one, old Princess Consort Yu, who was in charge of the entire situation." Old Princess Consort Yu couldn't help but laugh. "Child, you are really joking. You suspected me just now, and I've already explained it clearly. Mother Hui, who died from poison, also said that she used a trick to deceive me. This case has nothing to do with me from the beginning to the end. Why would this old woman want to harm fourth young miss and consort Qi? Cough cough. Your Majesty, this old one's physical strength is truly lacking. Please forgive this old one for taking her leave first. Half of what you said just now is true. Your target has never been the fourth young miss of the Qi family. You assisted Mother Hui and Eunuch Jingzhong in their revenge only as an exchange. The person you really want to kill is Consort Qi, because she once caused your death." Ning Shu said word by word, "Your only daughter." Following Ning Shu's narration, old Princess Consort Yu's benevolent and loving expression cracked inch by inch and froze in place. She turned around and angrily shouted at Ning Shu, "What nonsense are you talking about? Ever since I married into Prince Yu's estate, I've only given birth to 2 sons for the old prince. I've never had a daughter. Daughter of the Ning family, if you continue to speak nonsense, don't blame this old one for using my age and status to punish you for your disrespect. Chapter 224. Ning Shu, you have to pay attention to your words. Chief Eunuch Zhao Bin swept the tail of his spear and immediately reprimanded Ning Shu. The matter of the imperial bloodline is as important as Mount Tai and cannot be slandered. Furthermore, old princess consort Yu has a revered status. How dare you slander her so rudely? Quickly kneel down and beg for forgiveness. The imperial family was known as the imperial family because it had a supreme status and the most precious bloodline in the world could not be mixed with anything else. Therefore, every child of the imperial family would be recorded in detail in the records of the Internal Affairs Department until their death. Old Prince Yu was the closest and most trusted elder brother of His Majesty. In the prince's residence, only the South Pacifying Prince's residence had a special status that could be compared to him. Every time Prince Yu's residence gave birth to a prince or princess, His Majesty would reward them greatly. Thus, everyone knew that old Princess Consort Yu had given birth to 2 legitimate sons for old Prince Yu. Unfortunately, both of them died while suppressing bandits. Every time His Majesty thought about it, he would feel sad. Why did Ning Shu suddenly mention a daughter today? Wasn't this hinting that old Princess Consort Yu's body was not upright? This was a great humiliation to both old Princess Consort Yu and Prince Yu's residence. This Ning family's eldest daughter was young, but her courage was bigger than a leopard's. However, everyone present silently raised their heads and secretly glanced at old Princess Consort Yu, who had fallen silent after her outburst. Everyone in the capital knew that old Princess Consort Yu had always been amiable and benevolent. She stood aloof from worldly affairs and treated everyone with tolerance. However, because of her excessive anger, she clutched her chest and gasped for breath. Her hands trembled like withered branches in the cold winter and could be broken by a gust of wind at any time. Everyone present was His Majesty's trusted aides and their mouths were tighter than the hardest rock in the world. However, this did not stop their brains from thinking, guessing, and doubting. Could this matter be? Everyone's hearts thumped and they hurriedly lowered their heads, not listening, not thinking, and obediently turning themselves back into a rock. This was the best way to preserve their lives. Looking at old Princess Yu's angry and embarrassed expression, His Majesty frowned and didn't say anything. He seemed to be deep in thought. Amidst this indescribable silence, Xiahou Qing calmly gathered his cloak and took a step back towards the corridor, not allowing the raindrops to splash on him. Then he said casually, "Your Majesty, the reason why rumors can run rampant in this world is because when they first started, everyone thought them to be ridiculous and laughable, not to be believed. So they put them at the back of their minds and ignored them. Little did he know that this gave it the opportunity to distort and expand. From Li Kuei to Li Gui, and from Li Gui to a horrifying monster. Therefore, this official believes that rather than allowing this rumor to destroy the prestige of Prince Yu's residence, old Princess Consort Yu, and the late old Prince Yu, it would be better to explain it clearly today and completely extinguish the flames before it ignites. Your Majesty is wise and far-sighted, so you can naturally distinguish between right and wrong and return old Princess Consort Yu's innocence." After listening to Xiahou Qing's words, His Majesty pondered for a moment and then nodded slightly. His gaze moved to Ning Shu. "Then, we will give you a chance. Remember, if there is a single false word or unfounded speculation, we will not tolerate it." Ning Shu bowed her head and thanked him respectfully. "Thank you, Your Majesty, for your trust. I am willing to use my head as a guarantee that there is not a single false word in what I am about to say." Chapter 225. After bowing, Ning Shu raised her head and slowly said, "Ever since I was a child, I have always listened to my father's teachings. What I heard the most was the principle of brothers working together through thick and thin. Because my father often used Your Majesty and the late old Prince Yu as examples, I have always remembered it in my heart and never forgot to practice it. Ever since Imperial Brother passed away 6 years ago, there are fewer and fewer people who still remember him. Especially in the past 2 years, there are very few people who have mentioned him. Among those few people, Most of them are just trying to figure out what I'm thinking and trying to curry favor with me. I didn't expect your father to be such a considerate person. His Majesty sighed with emotion. Imperial brother really treated me well. Please continue. Among them, what I remember most clearly is the rebellion of Zhao Wenzhong in Jingzhou 38 years ago. At that time, as the fourth prince, your Majesty and old prince, you worked together to quell the rebellion. After going through countless difficulties and dangers, you finally defeated the rebels and saved the people from disaster. Every time I hear about it, I can't help but feel my blood boil. I only hate that I was born too late and was unable to experience your Majesty and old Prince Yu's indomitable spirit. It is truly a great regret. His Majesty laughed and shook his head. That was the first time I led troops to quell a rebellion, and I met Zhao Wenzhong. That Zhao Wenzhong was the world's most arrogant and rebellious rat. He actually dared to declare himself as the divine dragon king of Heaven's Mandate. At that time, I was still young and hot-blooded. When I heard about it, I immediately asked the previous emperor for permission to quell the rebellion. However, I carelessly underestimated the cunning of that traitor and almost fell into his trap. After 3 days and 3 nights of bloody battle, more than half of the soldiers I led were killed or injured. The situation was urgent. That traitor arrogantly shouted from the city gate tower, saying that he wanted to capture me alive. At that critical moment, I didn't expect Imperial brother to risk his life and charge into the thousands of soldiers and horses to bring me out of the encirclement. This gave me the opportunity to beat him at his own game. I lured him into the chilling gorge and caught him like a turtle in a jar. I took the opportunity to shoot an arrow through his head. The morale of the enemy troops immediately collapsed and they fled like rats. After a few more days of encirclement and suppression, all the rebels were finally wiped out. When we cut off the head of the last rebel leader, there were 4 wounds on our body, and Imperial brother had 5 or 6. But when we looked at each other and laughed, it was truly the best feeling in the world. Recalling the glory of the past, the Emperor's wrinkled face, which had been eroded by time, showed a strange radiance. It was as if he had instantly returned to his youth, when he was not afraid of death and was reckless and frivolous. Everyone was praising His Majesty for his bravery, but no one noticed that old Princess Consort Yu was clenching her fists so hard that her fingernails were digging into her palms. Ning Shu looked silently and finally had to say, "I heard that old Princess Consort Yu also participated in that battle." The Emperor nodded and said, "Imperial sister-in-law has always been brave, and she is deeply in love with Imperial brother. Therefore, every time Imperial brother went out to battle, Imperial sister-in-law would beat the war drums to boost the morale. Dressed in red, she looked valiant and formidable. She was praised by everyone back then. However, that battle was too tragic. In order to save Zhen, Imperial brother accidentally separated from Imperial sister-in-law. Fortunately, there was a loyal subordinate who protected Imperial sister-in-law all the way back to the capital and reunited with Imperial brother. Otherwise, Zhen would feel guilty for the rest of Zhen's life. The Emperor said apologetically, "Imperial sister-in-law, you were frightened that time. Old Princess Consort Yu was like a withered tree on the verge of death. She was stunned for a moment before she regained her senses. Stiffly, she raised her head and squeezed out a dry smile. Your Majesty, there is no need to be so polite. This old one is fine. Look, didn't this old one live well to this day?" After that, old Princess Consort Yu did not participate in any battles with the army. She recuperated at the Yangyun Terrace for more than a year before returning to the capital. After that, she lived in seclusion and did not leave the residence unless it was necessary. She also did not see anyone until old Prince Yu passed away. Ning Shu did not say much. In just a few short sentences, it was as if she had touched on the subject. But the hidden meaning within made everyone present shudder with fear and trepidation. Even the Emperor's face suddenly changed. This old one was frightened. What's wrong with recuperating at the Yangyun Terrace? As for whether or not to leave the residence, it is this old one's freedom. Do I need the permission of a silly girl like you? Old Princess Consort Yu clutched at her chest and panted rapidly. Every line on her face was taut to the extreme. She almost shouted, "Ning Shu, what do you want to say?" This humble girl does not want to say anything. I am just stating a fact, Ning Shu said softly. You did have a daughter for a short period of time. That daughter was unfortunately conceived in the chaos of war 38 years ago and died in the palace 6 years ago. She was a literary talent. Chapter 226. Ridiculous. His Majesty was the first to utter this word. His Majesty subconsciously refuted Ning Shu's assertion at the first instance. It wasn't that he didn't believe her words, but that it was too unbelievable. Too unbelievable. 6 years had passed, and Wang Siren had never been favored by him. Therefore, his impression of that average-looking woman was like the wings of a butterfly, broken and blurry. If she wasn't Changping's birth mother, he probably wouldn't even remember who she was. He accidentally slept with her when he was drunk, and when he woke up, his first reaction was to frown. When he found out that she was pregnant, he had no choice but to make her a concubine and throw her into the harem. After that, the number of times he had slept with her could be counted with one hand. There were too many women like this in the palace. When he heard that she had died of an epidemic, it didn't even cause a ripple in his heart. He only casually ordered people to bury her and then completely threw it to the back of his mind. He would never have thought that the ordinary and boring woman would be brought up today, and in such an unbearable way. If what Ning Shu said was true, then what happened to old Princess Yu 38 years ago? My daughter's words may sound preposterous, but they are not without reason. It started from when 4th Miss and the 13th Princess fell into the water in the Imperial Garden. When 4th Miss fell into the water, she pointed out that the 13th Princess did it on purpose. The 13th Princess said that she suddenly saw a poisonous bee trying to sting 4th Miss, so she went forward to warn her. After that, I asked the 13th Princess in private and found out the mystery of Wang Siren's death. It turned out that Wang Siren didn't die from the epidemic, but from the poison of the ghost head bee. After that, I boldly examined Wang Siren's corpse and found that the 13th Princess was not lying. Moreover, I also obtained an unexpected harvest. Wang Siren's coffin had been opened not long ago and someone had put something inside. Ning Shu gently took out the longevity lock that had been weathered by the wind and frost for more than 30 years and presented it in front of everyone, including old Princess Consort Yu. Old Princess Yu's eyes were wide open as she stared fixedly at the longevity lock. It was as if she wanted to see through the longevity lock and see through the sorrow that she had been trying to escape from for many years, but had never been able to. And that sorrow was mixed with the mournful cry of a baby. The meaning of something like a longevity lock is too extraordinary. Normally, it would be prepared by the biological parents for the babies they are pregnant with. When Siren's parents had passed away long ago, how could someone suddenly pry open her coffin and put this thing in her heart? Thus, I had a huge suspicion. But first, this conjecture was so bizarre that I didn't dare to believe it for a while. Second, other than this longevity lock, I didn't find any other sufficient evidence. Finally, the case of Wen Cai Ren and the case of the 4th young miss were intertwined with each other, making it difficult for me to understand. Until I figured out the secret behind 4th Miss's silent disappearance in Fragrant Palace at first, I suspected that the 5 maidservants were in cahoots with Mother Hui, but later on, I rejected that idea. Because to succeed in this case, it wasn't something that could be done by a few lowly servants. There must be someone in a high position behind the scenes, providing help and cover for others. But who could this person be? Only you, whether it was the consort selection in Weiyang Palace, the appearance of the poisonous bees in the Imperial Garden, or the disappearance of Fragrant Palace. The one who witnessed all of this was you, old Princess Yu. At first, my suspicion was, could it be that you set up this revenge to stand up for the 13th princess? But on the surface, you don't seem to have any blood relations with the 13th princess. It's just a few years of friendship, so it's not enough for you to take such a big risk. Then what could be the reason? Sometimes, the most unexpected thing is the final answer. After figuring out the ins and outs of this series of cases, I immediately asked Xiaoho Shizi to help me find a person, and this person was the old mama who had always served you at Yang Yun Tai. Others might not know that you were pregnant, but it definitely couldn't be hidden from that mama's eyes. And right now, that mama is in a carriage outside Shenqing Temple. Old Princess Yu, Do you need me to invite her in for a meeting? No. Old princess, you almost screamed. She stumbled and was hurriedly supported by the palace servants beside her. That pair of old and unfocused eyes suddenly rolled out large drops of tears. She tightly clutched her chest, as if she didn't do so, that old and unbearable heart would be vomited out of her mouth. No need, she forcefully closed her eyes, as if she was crying, as if she was laughing. She finally accepted the fact that she didn't want to face in this lifetime. Yi Ji is indeed my biological daughter. It's Changping, and also my biological granddaughter. Chapter 227. Looking at this old woman who had finally been defeated by her and admitted to all her crimes, Ningxu didn't feel very happy. Instead, she felt depressed, as if she was stuffed with cotton and couldn't breathe. She just wanted to let out a long and helpless sigh. Counting back 40 years, who in the capital didn't envy me for being the luckiest woman in the Great Yu dynasty? Even I think so. Old princess consort Yu sneered and pushed away the palace servant who was supporting her. She slowly walked to the end of the long corridor under the dark green banana trees and tidied the silver hair that had fallen down her temples. She turned her head and looked at Ningxu through the branches and leaves of the banana tree. She used a hoarse voice to murmur, I was born in a prestigious family in the capital. Like you, I was protected by my parents since I was young. When the flowers bloomed, I married the most honest, kind, and brave man in the world. I easily obtained the thing that women in the world yearned for the most. Wang was young and handsome. No matter if it was his appearance or temperament, he was the best among the men in the capital. Although he wasn't good with words, he treated me with gentleness and respect. It was all reflected in his actions and eyes, and it came from the bottom of his heart. I was protected since I was young and had a very stubborn personality. Wang tolerated me in all aspects and did everything according to my wishes. He almost treated me like a child and doted on me. At that time, I thought that I must have done a great deed in my previous life for me to meet such a good match in this life. Old Princess Yu spoke slowly, a dazed and fragile smile appearing on her face. It was as if she had flown back 40 years and turned back into a young and beautiful bride, nervously and expectantly sitting by the bed, waiting for her groom to pick up the scale and lift her veil. Very quickly, we had our first child. Not long after, we had our second. From then on, our relationship became even more sincere. In the words of others, it was like we were one person, inseparable and sweeter than honey. That was the best time of my life. His Highness had great ambitions. He was not bound to the imperial court, nor was he bound to the capital. He was bound to the common people. He said that he only has 2 wishes in this life, one is to protect our little family, the other is to sweep away the enemy and pacify the Kuding country, to bring peace to the people and protect their family. Since you're going to the bloody battlefield, I'll beat the drum and wave the flag for you. In this life, we'll live together. Even if we die, we'll die under the yellow sand. Neither of us will abandon the other. As a result, His Highness was victorious in battle after battle. He said that as long as he thought of me behind him, there was only one choice left in his life, victory. Because he would never allow himself to see me get hurt in front of him. Over time, the story of us husband and wife working together became a story told by the common people. I thought that this story would continue until the rebellion of Zhao Wenzhong 38 years ago. Ningxu couldn't help but say, Old Princess Yu, Old Princess Consort Yu casually waved her hand at her, indicating that since things had already come to this, what else did she not dare to say or face? Looking at the stunned emperor, a cold smile appeared on Old Princess Consort Yu's face. Your Majesty is somewhat right. That Zhao Wenzhong is truly an arrogant and treacherous person with many tricks up his sleeve. From the beginning, he set up a series of schemes with the intention of coaxing our army into entering the competition. However, Wang had been on the battlefield for many years and quickly discovered the abnormality and pointed it out. However, Your Majesty was eager to gain merit for the first time and didn't listen to Wang Ye's advice and insisted on attacking the city. Wang Ye had no choice but to risk his life and charge into the city to lend Your Majesty a helping hand. However, what none of you know is that when he brought Your Majesty out of the encirclement, I was captured by the rebels and suffered the most unbearable humiliation in this world. Chapter 228. Drop by drop, huge teardrops rolled down from her eyes, as if she was being questioned by a slap. His Majesty opened his mouth and was momentarily speechless. Old Princess Consort, you sneered, her gaze returning to the empty space. She smiled and cried, he clearly promised me that he would never allow himself to see me get hurt in front of him. But when things came to it, he personally tore his promise to pieces. The moment the city gates closed, he clearly heard my shouts and even turned his head, but in the end, he still led your Majesty out of the city gates. Between his family and the country, he chose the country. Between his wife and his brothers, he chose his brothers. It's not that I can't understand the choices he made, but what I can't understand is why I have to bear all the bitterness and filth by myself. 3 days. For 3 whole days, I tried my best to hide. The last bodyguard by my side died, but I still couldn't escape from the claws of those beasts. In one night, I went from being the luckiest woman in the Great Yu dynasty to being trampled into a pool of disgusting mud, until General Wen Ya led his men to find me. I had also thought about whether I should just end my life with a white silk. But General Wen Ya and his wife were indeed good people. They promised me that they would never reveal this secret to a third person in their lifetime and would treat it as if this matter had never happened. Thus, I hesitated. With this hesitation, the white silk had already been cut by Madame Wen. A few days later, I returned to the capital. At that time, the prince and his Majesty had also successfully eliminated the rebels and returned to the capital. We had a tacit understanding and no one mentioned anything about what happened during the chaos. It was just that every time it was late at night, the nightmarish scenes of the past would haunt me, causing me to be unable to sleep at night. The prince noticed my abnormality, so he probed me to see if something had happened. How could I answer? Say that your princess consort was trampled on in the chaos of war and her chastity was lost. In that case, the glory of Prince Yu's residence and the face of my mother's family would be reduced to a laughingstock. Even my Cheng and Yu would find it difficult to establish themselves in this world. Therefore, I could only lower my eyes and smile as I said to him, too many people died in that battle. I was scared out of my wits. In the future, I won't dare to go onto the battlefield again. I'll rest in the manor like the other madams and wait for your return. His Highness hugged me lovingly and agreed. To make it up to me, he treated me even better than before. Slowly, I purposely forgot about the shadow. I thought that the nightmare would finally end, and I would be able to wait for the day of rebirth. But I didn't expect that 2 months later, when I was drinking a bowl of mutton soup, I suddenly vomited. At that time, I realized that I might be pregnant. Ning Shu said in a low voice, so, after that, you used the excuse that you weren't feeling well and moved to the Yangyun terrace to recuperate. Old Princess Consort, you nodded in self-mockery. That's right. At that time, I didn't know what to do and was in a panic. I didn't dare to call any doctor to take my pulse. Otherwise, my secret would have been exposed. At the same time, I still had a trace of hope in my heart. What if this child wasn't the traitor's, but His Highness? But I couldn't be sure. If it wasn't, when the truth came out, how could I face His Highness? How could I face the world's gossip? Therefore, I couldn't tell anyone about this matter. I could only tear it to shreds, chew it up, and swallow it into my stomach. Then, I moved to the Yangyun terrace. Using the excuse of cultivating my body, I didn't bring many maidservants with me. I also used all sorts of excuses to avoid meeting His Highness. I couldn't tell anyone about the depression and sorrow in my heart. I could only secretly tell Madame Wen. She gave me an idea. She said, after the child is born, secretly take a drop of His Highness's blood to test for paternity. If it was His Highness's, naturally everyone would be happy and there would be no worries. If it wasn't. She and Wen Ya had been married for many years and didn't have a child. She was willing to raise it for me. As the child grew up day by day, my stomach also gradually swelled. Although I kept trying to convince myself that this child might be His Highness's and that I couldn't abort it, it would be too late for regrets. But in reality, I had already sensed it. It was just that I kept lying to myself. It was as if as long as I didn't admit it, that filthy thing never happened. Old Princess Consort Yu's voice was too sorrowful. Ning Shu couldn't bear to interrupt her. Until old Princess Consort Yu's empty gaze fell on the banana leaf in front of her. After a long silence, Ning Shu said softly, "So you secretly went to the silversmith shop to make a longevity lock for her?" "That's right. Actually, I had hesitated. If it wasn't His Highness's biological child, but the unfilial child from that day, should I just strangle her to death? But that was a piece of soft flesh that grew out of my stomach. Whenever I thought of killing her with my own hands, my chest hurt so much that I couldn't breathe. I hated her, but at the same time, I felt guilty towards her. Because what did all of this have to do with her? Coming to this world was probably a calamity for her. So I thought for a long time and decided to go to the silversmith shop to make a longevity lock for her. After she was born, she was destined to be abandoned by me. That longevity lock could be considered my only wish for her as a mother." Chapter 229. However, I didn't expect that before the longevity lock was set, I would give birth to her prematurely. When I saw her face clearly, I knew that my dream had been shattered. She doesn't look anything like Your Highness. Instead, the birthmark on her ear is exactly the same as one of the bastards who humiliated me that day. With a snap, the banana leaf in old Princess Consort Yu's hand was crushed into pieces by old Princess Yu. When I saw her, the nightmare of that night came back to me with a sinister smile. I didn't even want to look at her a second time and immediately begged Madam when to take her away. From then on, she had nothing to do with me. After that, I rested at Yangyun Terrace for 2 months and returned to the prince's residence. I didn't leave the house and lived the life of a noble lady that I used to despise the most. As for the child that represented my humiliation, I completely threw her to the back of my mind. Madam Wen kept her promise and never came to disturb me again. I also deliberately avoided any news from the Wen family. Until one day, I suddenly heard that Lord Wen and Madam Wen had died of illness one after another. That child was sent back to her hometown in the countryside. After a few years, I heard that she was sent to the palace as a palace maid. In all those years, I always knew about her. I knew that she was looked down upon and treated as a servant. I knew that she was favored by His Majesty and gave birth to a princess. However, her life was even worse than before. However, I never interfered with her. I didn't even see her once. Because I didn't dare. Because I didn't want to. Because she was a thorn in my heart. Her life was poisoned. Who told her to come to this world and throw herself into my stomach? She deserved it. She deserved it all. Ha ha ha, listen to this. Which child in this world is more unlucky than her to have such a vicious birth mother like me? I always cursed her in my heart, hating that she shouldn't have come to this world. Then, my curse came true and she really died. She died from the ghost head bees that imperial concubine Qi gave her, and she died because of my indifference. Perhaps even the heavens couldn't stand it anymore and wanted to punish me. Not long after her death, the prince suddenly died of illness. Following that, my Cheng-er and Yu-er were ambushed while suppressing bandits and were pierced through the heart by thousands of arrows. It was as if all the people I cared about had died overnight. Not a single one was left alive. I was the only one left in this huge mansion. Every day, I wandered around like a lonely ghost. Look, I got my retribution. This is my retribution. Ha 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 ha. Old Princess Yu laughed crazily. Her laughter was hoarse, but Ning Shu wanted to walk over and hug her, asking her to stop crying. You hate her, but at the same time, you are also secretly loving her. The laughter stopped abruptly as old Princess Consort Yu denied, Nonsense. How could I love her? I only hate her. Complete and utter hatred. If it wasn't for her, His Highness and I wouldn't have ended up treating each other with respect and treating each other so coldly. My entire life has been ruined by her. Ning Shu's eyes reflected her deliberately ferocious face. She slowly shook her head. If there is only hatred, then after her death, why did you take the risk of your secret being discovered and take the initiative to ask His Majesty to bring the 13th princess to your side for education? If there is only hatred, then why did you set up such a big plan to take revenge on the Qi family and imperial concubine Qi? Shen Xing, Mother Hui, Eunuch Jingzhong, there are so many people. It is impossible to find out their secrets and gather them together in 3 to 5 days. I'm afraid that you have been secretly planning for many years for today. Also, this longevity lock. If you didn't pry open Wen Siren's coffin and place this longevity lock in her heart, I wouldn't have been able to connect it to the events of the past. Everything you are doing now is compensation. Compensation for all the things you had to do in the past. How should a mother treat a child that she didn't welcome? This question was too difficult and too complicated. Ning Shu couldn't answer it, nor could she empathize with it. She only felt her heart ache and her stomach churn. Chapter 230. At this point, the truth was revealed to the world. The emperor was shocked by wave after wave. He couldn't help but stare blankly at the scene, speechless. Was the cause of all these tragedies really that unlucky baby girl from back then? No, it wasn't. Then who was it? Could it be? No, he was the emperor, the destined emperor. An emperor wouldn't make any mistakes in his life. That's right. Everything was planned by me. Every step and every nail in the arrangement was carefully selected by me. Even these ghost head wasps were collected by me and given to Jingzhong. Does your majesty want the antidote? Wiping away the tears on her face, old consort Yu raised her head. At this moment, she no longer had any secrets. It was as if she had been freed. She said without fear, "Then your majesty, please give the order to kill consort Qi." At the side, Xiao Yunsu, who had been listening quietly, suddenly raised his head and said angrily, "Trap. This is a trap. What do you mean my mother killed Wen Siren? Nonsense. Imperial father, please don't listen to other people's instigation. Consort mother has never harmed anyone. If she has the ability, let her take out the evidence." Lord Qi also knelt down and shouted, "My Qi family has been loyal to the imperial court and contributed everything. Your majesty, please investigate." The emperor frowned. He might be concerned about their old relationship, but that was mainly his relationship with his elder brother, old Prince Yu. But no matter how great the relationship was, old Prince Yu was already dead. In the end, it couldn't be compared to his court. After weighing the pros and cons, His Majesty finally said, "Imperial sister-in-law, you are making things difficult for me. You said that consort Qi killed Wen Siren, then do you have evidence? If you don't have evidence, I have no reason to issue this imperial edict." Old Princess Yu sneered. At this moment, her face was brimming with a carefree smile. It was as if she had returned to the legendary princess consort from 30 years ago, who was dressed in red and fearless, standing on the city gate to cheer for the emperor. His Majesty's beloved concubine might be very patient. How could she allow the evidence to remain? Since your Majesty can't bear to kill her, then it doesn't matter. Anyway, if we can't get the antidote, that woman will die anyway. Then your Majesty, please wait. When the time is up, your beloved consort and your officials will die together. I don't mind dragging a few more people down with me. Old Princess Yu's decisiveness was equivalent to publicly falling out with His Majesty. The consequences. As expected, His Majesty's face quickly darkened. Ning Shu worriedly stepped forward, wanting to persuade old Princess Consort Yu. A hand pulled her back from behind. Xiaoho Qing pinched her arm and whispered in her ear, "So far, you've done everything you can. What happens next is not something you can control." But, his clear and calm breath brushed past her ear, "There are no buts. Old Princess Consort Yu has already passed the age of heavenly mandate. She naturally knows what she wants. I also know that if you continue to interfere in this matter, you should be worried about your little life. Stand aside, I'll do it." After pulling Ning Shu behind him, Xiaoho Qing stepped forward and asked old Princess Yu calmly, "Old Princess Yu, if you were given a choice, did you really want someone to stop you when you picked up the white silk 38 years ago?" "What do you mean?" "Nothing, I just have a doubt. Humans seem to be naturally afraid of death. But between life and death, which is the boundless hell? And old Princess Consort Yu, what do you really want?" Xiaoho Qing's voice was extremely calm, like a frozen pond without a single ripple. However, it caused old Princess Consort Yu's eyes to reveal a moment of confusion. Looking back at the half of her life that was immersed in the dark swamp, old Princess Consort Yu couldn't help but stagger as she muttered to herself, "That's right, sometimes living is even harder than dying." Compared to the endless torture, death was much more satisfying. I almost let her off easy. Not only should I not want her to die, I should let her live. Living miserably and soberly is the ending she deserves. Chapter 231. Xiao Yunsu stared fixedly at the scene and could see the subtle change in old Consort Yu's attitude. He shouted angrily, "Xiahou Qing, what are you doing?" Xiahou Qing tilted his chin in his direction and said slowly, "I'm saving your Highness's mother's life. There's no need to thank me." Xiao Yunsu was instantly enraged. "You." Meanwhile, old Princess Consort Yu, who was deep in thought by herself, also had a final answer in her heart. She laughed coldly and said in a clear voice, "I can spare Consort Chi's life, and I can also hand over the antidote for the ghost head bees. If your Majesty doesn't agree, then this matter will be dropped. As for the antidote, I will throw it all into the mud. I'll have to trouble your Majesty's beloved concubines and important officials to accompany me to the Yellow Springs." Xiao Yunsu immediately said, "Imperial Father, you can't agree to her requests. She must be plotting against Consort Mother." His fists were tightly clenched and the veins on the back of his hand popped out. If it wasn't for the antidote, he would have killed old Consort Yu to vent his anger. Unfortunately, he didn't have the upper hand right now. Plotting against her? Old Princess Consort Yu sneered with her eyes half closed. "If I really wanted to harm her, it would be very simple. I would just waste time with you all until she dies from the poison. Wouldn't it be enough to cure her? What was the point of doing so? Don't worry, I won't kill her. I just want to say a few words to Consort Chi. After that, I'll take out the antidote and personally cure her." After she finished speaking, old Consort Yu closed her eyes and didn't say another word. Time passed by slowly. The cries of the poisoned people came closer and closer, causing His Majesty's face to become increasingly tense and gloomy. Finally, he made a decision. Waving the wide sleeves of her bright yellow dragon robe, old Consort Yu finally opened her eyes and revealed a joyful smile. She solemnly tidied her hair and robes that had been messed up by the wind and rain. Under the watchful eyes of the palace servants, she slowly walked into Consort Chi's room. No one knew what she was going to say. Step by step, she slowly walked towards Consort Chi, who was screaming in pain from the poison. Behind her, the Emperor's muffled voice sounded, "Sister-in-law, think about Changping." Old Princess Consort Yu's body became sluggish, as if she was tired. She bent down and coughed heavily a few times, coughing until her face turned pale. Only then did she stand on her tiptoes again. "Your Majesty actually used your own daughter to threaten me. You are truly wise and divine. Please rest assured, Your Majesty, I will do as I say. I will definitely not leave a wound on her body." Under everyone's nervous and wary gazes, old Princess Yu walked to Imperial Concubine Chi's side. She lowered her head and looked at her quietly. Using a voice that no one could hear, she whispered something into her ear. Then, she smiled and took out a bottle of pills from her sleeve to stuff into Imperial Concubine Chi's mouth. Their breathing was so quiet that they could hear each other. Xiao Yunsu immediately rushed forward and pushed old Princess Consort Yu away. He looked at his mother anxiously and saw that the bruises on her face that had been stung by the poisonous bees were fading away at a speed visible to the naked eye. She spat out a large mouthful of black blood and her complexion started to look better. "Your Majesty, the poison has been cured," Zhao Bin reported excitedly. Old Princess Consort Yu snorted coldly and handed over all the antidotes on her body. Zhao Bin immediately took them and ran to the imperial physicians to distribute the antidotes to the other victims. Everyone secretly let out a sigh of relief. Even His Majesty's complexion was slightly better, but his brows were still tightly knitted. He still hadn't decided what crime to punish old Princess Consort Yu for and how to punish her. In the next moment, Xiao Yunsu's eyes suddenly widened. His gaze landed on the side of Imperial Concubine Chi's neck and he shouted in alarm, What What is this? Imperial father. Imperial father. Ning Shu subconsciously restrained herself and quickly stepped into the quiet room. Imperial concubine Qi, whose complexion had just improved, suddenly felt her throat bulge as she spat out another mouthful of blood. Following that, her entire body began to convulse. On the side of her snow-white neck, a faint color slowly appeared. Then, more and more of it gathered and formed the pattern of a plum blossom. Ning Shu sucked in a cold breath and clutched her chest. Plum blossom kiss. This was plum blossom kiss. Chapter 232. Ning Shu immediately turned her head and looked in the direction of old consort Yu. Old consort Yu smiled secretly. Live well. Live in the fear of every day and night, live in the fear of death every day and night, live in the anxiety of every moment, every snap of a finger, every second, living a life worse than death. Live to your heart's content. And I can finally have a good rest. After she finished speaking, she closed her eyes tiredly. Her heart skipped a beat. Ning Shu instinctively had a premonition and dashed over. However, she was too fast. Before she could even touch old Princess Consort Yu's sleeve, she saw a trace of black blood flowing out from the corner of her mouth. Amidst everyone's chaotic cries, she fell to the ground with a plop. Ning Shu immediately rushed over and pressed old Consort Yu's acupoints, Quantsu, Chungchi, and other acupoints. Hui Mo, quick. Unfortunately, after a moment, Hui Mo looked at the silver needle that had turned completely black from head to toe. He silently shook his head and said in a low voice, "It's the same as Mother Hui. It's also the powder of oleander. It's hidden in the medicine pouch under her tongue. As long as you bite it lightly, the poison inside will immediately flow into your throat. It's useless now." Ning Shu stared blankly at the old woman in front of her. Her body twitched a few times in pain, but there was a smile on her lips. Just like that, she slowly lost her breath. No one would have thought that a case that started from a small piece of paper would end up like this. The emperor let out a few muffled breaths. His gaze constantly sized up the various expressions of fear on everyone's faces. His gloomy eyes reflected Xiao Yunsu's anger, Xiahou Qing's contemplation, Ning Shu's long eyelashes drooping, and finally stopped for a long time on old Consort Yu's face and the strange red plum that suddenly appeared on the side of Consort Chi's neck. He paused for a long time until everyone felt uneasy. Only then did he lower his voice and say slowly, "Come, pass down Zhen's decree and announce to the world, the Yellow Sky sect conspired to revolt and burned the Qi family's fourth young Miss Qi Zhanyu to death with sorcery. They also released the ghost head bees in an attempt to harm Zhen. Old Princess Consort Yu unfortunately died in order to save Zhen. The world mourns her death. Imperial concubine Qi was framed and poisoned in the chaos. Zhen promoted her to Imperial concubine Gui to appease her. In addition, the Imperial Academy of Medicine must do their best to help Imperial concubine Qi recover as soon as possible. They must not slack off, otherwise, they will be punished even more." His sharp eyes narrowed. "This matter ends here. No one is allowed to say a single word about what happened here today. Otherwise, you will be going against me and against the imperial court. I will execute all 9 generations of his family." Everyone lowered their heads and kept quiet. Other than obeying the imperial edict, no one dared to utter a single word. The bright yellow dragon robe flicked his sleeves and left, leaving Zhao Bin and the others to clean up the mess. Lord Qi's throat went mute and he could no longer utter a single word. The emperor had already promoted Imperial concubine Qi to Imperial concubine Gui. Although this Imperial concubine Gui had already gone mad and no longer had any practical use, she was still an Imperial concubine Gui. She was His Majesty's unparalleled gift and was also a stone to shut the Qi family's mouth. In a daze, he brought Qi Zhuanyu's charred corpse back to his residence and chose a day to bury it. Mother Hui and Jing Zhong were thrown to the Supreme Court like dead dogs. Tomorrow afternoon at the market, they would be treated as evil cult members and their corpses would be whipped in public as a warning to others. When old concubine Yu's corpse was carried away, a drop of black blood dripped from the corner of her mouth. Unknowingly, the rain had already stopped. The heavy rain just now had left many small puddles on the ground. The shallow puddles reflected the clouds and the sky above, making them look like jade. That drop of blood fell into one of the puddles and slowly dyed the blue jade into a pool of dark red. Ning Shu stood in place and stared at the puddles, speechless for a long time. She didn't feel the slightest bit of joy and satisfaction from solving the mystery of the case. Instead, her heart was filled with faint sighs and melancholy. Xiahou Qing's voice came from beside her. "The case has already been solved. What are you still standing here for? Let's go." Ning Shu was stunned. When she regained her senses, she followed Xiahou Qing's footsteps. After not hearing her reply for a long time, Xiahou Qing said, "Why aren't you saying anything? Are you still letting your imagination run wild?" Illusory and resolute figures flashed through her mind one after another. Ning Shu said softly, whether it was Shenxing, eunuch Jingzhong, Mother Hui, or old concubine Yu, they were all prepared to end their own lives before today's incident. Chapter 233. A drop of rainwater on the banana leaf slid down the veins of the leaf and landed on Ning Shu's cheek. She reached out to wipe it away and sighed slightly. Although their revenge is almost complete, the price is still too high. No merchant in this world was willing to make a loss, but they did. The compensation was 1-4. It was so tragic. Even though Imperial Concubine Qi had gone crazy, the Qi family had received the title of Imperial Concubine and the Empress Pity. On the other hand, Mother Hui and Jingzhong had to bear the infamy of being a traitor and be whipped in public. Could this really be considered a result? Xiahou Qing said softly, "No matter what happens after they die, at the moment of their deaths, it can be said that their long-cherished wish has been fulfilled, isn't it?" Ning Shu blinked and pondered for a long time with her eyes lowered. Then, she suddenly understood. That's right, they had planned for so many years and waited bitterly for this day. Regardless of whether it was hatred or guilt, they had all been comforted today. As for the soulless remains of a body after death, what difference did it make whether the body was burned to ashes or burned to ashes? The greatest fortune in life was to ask for benevolence and obtain benevolence. The gloominess in his chest dissipated without a sound. Ning Shu let out a long breath and raised her chin to look at the man beside her. She suddenly asked curiously, "Your Highness, aren't you anxious? What's there to be anxious about?" After the excess emotions were swept away, Ning Shu quickly regained her rationality. She quickly went through the series of events that had just happened. The plum blossom kiss appeared again. According to the situation at that time, the poison must have been placed on Imperial Concubine Qi by old concubine Yu. But before I could ask any questions, old concubine Yu had already committed suicide and the clues were cut off. Now, if we want to wait for the next clue, I'm afraid we'll have to wait a long time. Furthermore, this wait is very likely to come to nothing. It was truly too confusing. Could it be that the person who had used the plum blossom kiss to control the situation was old concubine Yu? But this didn't make any sense. If it was old concubine Yu who had poisoned Imperial Concubine Qi, it was understandable. After all, Imperial Concubine Yu had killed Imperial Concubine Yu 6 years ago. But why did old Princess Consort Yu want to harm her and Xiahou Qing? There was no enmity between them, and they were completely unrelated to each other. What reason was there for her to spend so much effort on this matter? Also, how did she manage to give Consort Qi a kiss? At that time, there were so many pairs of eyes watching. Old Princess Consort Yu walked in front of Consort Qi and bent down to whisper a few words in her ear. Then, she took out the bottle containing the antidote and casually poured out a pill to feed Consort Qi. Could it be that the antidote was added to the poison? But why was it that everyone else was fine after taking the antidote, but only Qi Fei was poisoned? How did old Princess Consort Yu ensure that she would be able to find the only pill that had been tampered with? Questions popped in her head like firecrackers, filling her with confusion. She wanted to examine old Princess Yu's body to see if she could find any clues, but His Majesty had ordered the chief eunuch, Zhao Bin, to take over the funeral and no one else was allowed to interfere. She watched helplessly as the clues passed by her twice. She couldn't help but feel anxious. After listening to her narration, Xiahou Qing nodded and seemed to have realized something. Anxious. Ning-Shu raised her eyebrows. Just as she was thinking, this is the normal reaction that a human should have. It's not like a living person to be so calm. Then, she heard Xiahou Qing continue, so you can immediately investigate the secret of the plum blossom kiss and help me find the antidote. Chapter 234. Ning-Shu was at a loss for words. No. If she still had some suspicions before old Princess Consort Yu was exposed, then when she received this unexpected answer, her entire being was in a mess and her mind was in a mess. Xiahou Qing curled the corner of his mouth and gave his response. Ning-Shu instantly fell silent, and she lamented over her incompetence. Xiahou Qing could hear her speechlessness and the smile on his lips deepened. After a moment, he continued, "Do you think it's old Princess Yu?" Ning-Shu thought for a moment and shook her head. "No. Do you still remember when we were investigating the Phoenix Terrace case, the third prince's trusted aide forged a letter from your father?" "I remember." In addition, when Wei Yang Palace was selecting concubines, someone also forged a letter that was almost identical to His Highness's handwriting. Now that the truth is out, it was old Princess Yu who ordered someone to do it. Xiahou Qing asked, "Even so, you still don't think it's her?" Ning-Shu pursed her lips and said quickly, "I can't give an accurate reason, it's just a feeling. From the moment I stepped out to expose her, to the moment old consort Yu committed suicide, I met her gaze many times. In her eyes, I saw coldness, nervousness, uneasiness, despair, relief. There were countless emotions, but I didn't see any hostility from the start. Unless she acted too well and didn't let me find out. But since she wanted to die, why would she hide it? Whether it's from my feelings or the analysis of the motive, I feel that the person we have been looking for is not old Princess Yu." Xiahou Qing said, "But there must be some kind of secret relationship with her." Ning-Shu agreed with this point. "Yes. This poison is too special, even the previous emperor died because of it. It's impossible for too many people to be involved in such a big mystery. So, if we continue to investigate old Princess Yu, we should be able to find some clues." But the problem came back. Old Princess Yu's corpse was in Zhao Bin's hands. And His Majesty's attitude just now clearly showed that he was very secretive about the plum blossom kiss. Otherwise, he wouldn't have given such a verbal order. The water here was too muddy. Ayaya, it was really a headache. Xiahou Qing silently turned the bones in his palm a few times, then he raised his chin and signaled Ning-Shu to follow him into the carriage. "Let's go." "Hey, where are we going?" Xiahou Qing calmly said, "Hui Mo hasn't played horseplay for a while, don't you think so?" Being called out for no reason, Hui Mo was confused. "Huh." Ning-Shu was also surprised for a moment, then she immediately reacted. She curved her eyes and revealed a sly smile. "Yes, I haven't played for a long time, so I'm really itching. The three of us can't sit at the same table, so we have to disturb Prince Ku and ask him to fill in the vacancy." Although old consort Yu's corpse was in Zhao Bin's hands, but for such a big matter like the burial of old consort Yu, there would definitely be people from the Ministry of Rites helping to arrange it. And wasn't Prince Ku the head of the Ministry of Rites? It was really embarrassing to have to trouble him again. A few miles away, Prince Ku, who was lying in Xiao Hongyang's arms and eating grapes, suddenly felt an itch at the tip of his nose and he sneezed loudly. He got up in confusion and looked at the closed window and the crack of the door. Hey! There was not a single gust of wind coming in, but why did he feel a gloomy chill, as if he was being watched by someone? He suddenly shuddered. "Not good, not good, this is very bad." Chapter 235. Inside Fu Ning Palace Hall. With a pa sound, a porcelain bowl filled with medicine was smashed to the ground by the emperor with a flick of his sleeve, shattering into pieces. "Take all of these away for Zhen. They're completely useless and extremely bitter. Zhen has already said that I won't drink a single mouthful, yet you keep bringing them over to be an eyesore. Are you deliberately trying to make Zhen even more unhappy?" The emperor stood up from the dragon throne and glared at the servants in front of him. His face was filled with thunderbolts. The ground was immediately filled with people kneeling, trembling as they begged for forgiveness. "This servant doesn't dare." But the imperial physicians. Imperial physicians, what dogs hit imperial physicians? They're all a bunch of trash. The poison of the ghost bees can't be cured. Imperial concubine Chi's illness is also at a loss. Even Zhen's head illness has not been alleviated after drinking so much of their medicine. Instead, it's getting worse, causing Zhen to have headaches and sleepless nights. They really can't do anything, so they're the number one in kowtowing and begging for forgiveness. Zhen will definitely drag them out one day and behead them all. The emperor was furious to the extreme. His vision turned black and his legs swayed, almost causing him to fall. He grabbed onto the armrest of the dragon throne, causing himself to fall onto the bright yellow and cold throne, so that he wouldn't lose his dragon face. Is your Majesty's head illness acting up again? A gentle and graceful voice followed the master's footsteps into the palace hall. Empress Cao waved her hand to dismiss the kneeling palace servants and walked to the emperor's side with a smile. This concubine has just learned the art of massage. Let this concubine give you a massage. Perhaps you'll feel more comfortable. As she spoke, Empress Cao took off the golden armor on her hands one by one. Just as her soft fingers touched the emperor's temples, he suddenly opened his eyes and grabbed Empress Cao's hand. He raised his head and looked at her with bloodshot eyes. Empress, the plum blossom kiss is back. Empress Cao let out an ah in a low voice. Her hands trembled, but she quickly calmed down, steadied her hands, and continued to massage. She deliberated and said, "Could it be that your Majesty was mistaken, or that someone deliberately set up a trap to create panic and deceive your Majesty?" The emperor's face was filled with exhaustion. No, this time, this emperor saw it with his own eyes. That plum blossom petal appeared on imperial concubine Chi's neck out of thin air. This emperor just ordered the palace servants to check it out. Imperial concubine Chi's sense of taste has already disappeared. There's no doubt it's that damned thing. But why did imperial sister-in-law have to use this poison? And where did she get this poison? I really don't understand. Previously, in the Phoenix Terrace case, the impostor also used this thing to murder the young master of the Yun family, Cloud Leaf. However, that impostor was unwilling to tell the truth until her death. Now, that damned thing has appeared again, and this time, it's even more arrogant. It actually dares to appear in front of me so openly. If it's not challenging my dragon might, then what is it? There must be someone secretly plotting all of this. Because he hadn't slept for many days and had personally experienced the series of events at Xianqing Monastery, the emperor had a splitting headache. His gaze fell on a certain point in the air, and he suddenly gripped the dragon throne's armrest tightly. His throat was almost hoarse as he said, "Empress, imperial father died from that poison ah." Empress Cao gently patted the back of his trembling hand that was bulging with blue veins. She gently comforted him. Since the young master of the Yun family was able to recover, it means that there's an antidote for that poison. It's not as frightening as we imagined. Your Majesty, don't worry. You are the destined emperor, the chosen one ah. Under Empress Cao's comforting voice, the emperor gradually calmed down. The empress is right. This emperor is the chosen one and will not fall to the same fate as imperial father. Since we've found out that it was imperial sister-in-law, then we should cut the weeds and eliminate the roots. All the servants in Prince Yu's estate are granted the grace to be buried with imperial sister-in-law. This emperor doesn't believe that there will be a fish that escapes the net. In addition, that lass from the Ning family knows too much. Moreover, that thing has appeared several times with her. That woman is very unlucky. Your Majesty means, the emperor nodded and rubbed his swollen temples. He lowered his eyes. I'll have to trouble the empress. Empress Cao was stunned for a moment, then she said, "This concubine obeys the emperor's decree." The walls of the palace were very thick and blocked out all the sounds from inside. No one knew that just a few words from the emperor and empress had already decided the life and death of a bunch of people, including Ning Shu, who they were just talking about. Only a gust of wind spied on the heavenly secrets outside Fu Ning Palace. It spun around quietly and drifted far away. It drifted to the most prosperous East City in the entire capital. It then passed through the bustling crowd and drifted to the tallest and most popular building in the city. Chasing Clouds and Chasing Moon Pavilion was as lively as usual. In a private room on the second floor, Ning Shu was concentrating on the card game in her hands. Chapter 236. In the hall downstairs, Bai Xiaosheng was surrounded by a circle of tables. Bai Xiaosheng was talking about the violent death of Qi Zhaoyu in Xianqing Temple. Everyone was listening with great interest, even forgetting to eat their melon seeds. After their true identities were exposed, the two evil cult members suddenly started chanting incantations. Under their summoning, countless poisonous bees flew over from the horizon, almost covering half of the sky. They rushed towards His Majesty and the other officials present. That scene, ayaya, simply made one's legs tremble, and one's stomach turn cold. Old Princess Consort Yu was standing beside His Majesty at that time. She immediately stood in front of His Majesty to protect him, but unfortunately, she was bitten by the poisonous bees. His Majesty was filled with grief and anger. A purple-gold dragon light burst out from his body, burning all the poisonous bees to ashes and taking down the two people on the spot. Unfortunately, old Princess Consort Yu was old and weak. Before she could be treated, she died from the poison. Bai Xiaosheng shook his head and sighed. It really makes people cry out in grief. Everyone was also filled with emotions and smacked their lips. One of them suddenly asked curiously, "Is the evil cult's magic really so powerful?" The person next to him who was eating melon seeds said, "Otherwise?" Fourth Miss Qi's body was burned to charcoal. Consort Qi was scared out of her wits on the spot. There were also many officials who were poisoned and carried out of Xianqing Temple. If it wasn't evil magic, what other explanation could there be? But his words were quickly refuted. If they were really so powerful, why didn't they save themselves in the end? Instead, they committed suicide out of fear of punishment. I saw the notice. His Majesty ordered that their bodies would be whipped at the Meridian Gate tomorrow and left to rot for 3 days. The person who was eating melon seeds blushed and hurriedly said, "You don't know. This is called the golden cicada shell shedding technique." On the surface, it looks like the two of them committed suicide by taking poison. In reality, the two bodies are just their shells. They were discarded after they were used. As for their souls, they had already flown beyond the 9 heavens and escaped to heaven. Seeing that the two of them were about to quarrel in public, another middle-aged man wearing brocade clothes said, "You two are really simple-minded. You are so easily fooled. In fact, the real situation is not what you think." Hundreds of curious eyes looked at him, greatly satisfying the middle-aged man's vanity. He coughed a few times and deliberately lowered his voice to say, "My brother-in-law sells herbal tea outside Xianqing Temple." According to what he saw with his own eyes, other than His Majesty and the officials of the Ministry of Justice, there was another person who went in and out of Xianqing Temple. Do you know who it was? Who? Don't keep me in suspense. Tell me who it is. Duke Ning's eldest daughter, Ning Shu. Ah, why is it her again? Why did she go to Xianqing Temple? Could it be that he's there to solve a case? Stop joking around. Who in the capital doesn't know that she's just an embroidered pillow, an idiot among women? If you want me to believe that she has the ability to solve the case, why don't you tell me that in reality, all of this was done by her own fate of being a jinx? With the help of her identity as the reincarnation of a celestial fox, it's easy for her to summon some poisonous insects and bees. As for the motive, I've heard more than once that fourth young Mistress Qi was disrespectful to Ning Shu at the entrance of the Yun residence and was given a resounding slap by Ning Shu. Since then, the two of them have formed a deep grudge. I also heard that when she was young, she greatly offended Consort Qi. Ah no, Imperial Consort Qi. That's right. Third young Master Qi was also killed by her. There are more twists and turns in this than we think. If she wanted to kill Qi Zhanyu, she should have done it long ago. Why wait until now? Also, why did she target the consort selection of Shizi Xiaohou? The reason is too simple. Her third husband, the Cloud Leaf young master, encountered an accident and also returned home to recuperate. She is now in urgent need of a new husband. Who in the capital do you think is a better candidate than Shizi Xiaohou? The onlookers who thought they had seen through the secrets of the heavens took a deep breath and looked at each other. They came to two conclusions at the same time. This Ning Shu was really a powerful character. If they saw her in the future, they would have to take a detour. Also, Shizi Xiaohou was really unlucky to be chosen by this woman who could jinx her husband. Ning Shu was speechless after being smashed into a pile of mud for no reason. She deliberately left a deep impression on people that she was an idiot, but she didn't expect to hit herself in the foot. Was this a success or failure? Under Prince Ku's interested gaze, she quietly raised her eyes and wanted to glance at Xiaohou Qing, but she interrupted herself and silently focused on the game in front of her. Last time, His Highness Prince Ku said that if she wanted to play with him, she should play with her real ability. Otherwise, even if she won, she wouldn't win happily. However, how could she let others pay for her help? Moreover, in a game of cards, if Prince Ku really lost too badly, although he didn't say it, he would definitely be unhappy in his heart. Therefore, there was a mystery in this. She couldn't let herself lose too obviously and dampen Prince Ku's mood, but she couldn't let him lose money. Ning Shu kept calculating in her heart. If she won a small round in this game and lost a big round in the next game, she would have 7 wins and 5 losses. Although it seemed that she won more often, in fact, the money would fall into Prince Ku's pocket more. She was concentrating on the small abacus in her heart and didn't see that Xiaohou Qing suddenly raised his eyebrows thoughtfully when he heard the discussion downstairs. Chapter 237. Play to the best of my ability. I played to my heart's content today. As expected, after a few rounds of mahjong, His Highness Prince Ku looked very happy. He patted his money pouch as if he had not played to his heart's content. If it was not for the fact that it was already dark, he would have played 3 more rounds. He smiled as he pointed at Ning Shu. Little girl Ning, you must know that playing mahjong is like going to the battlefield. You cannot only care about the small benefits in front of you. You must consider the big picture and always remember that you cannot be arrogant. For example, in the last round just now, you originally had a chance of winning. However, you were too anxious at the crucial moment. You were too eager to win and went for wool but came home shorn. Ning Shu frowned and smiled bitterly in annoyance. She stood up and sent Xiao Minglan out of the private room with Xiaohou Qing. That round just now was indeed my daughter's fault. His Highness Prince Ku is right. My daughter will remember. However, it's still all right. Although this prince won money, you are still better than me in terms of winning percentage. It can be considered a tie. Not bad, not bad. Ha 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 ha. All right, I have played to my heart's content today. This prince will return to the residence first. You don't have to send me off. Xiao Minglan waved his hand and stopped them. He walked down the stairs under the guidance of the servants. After keeping the official seal of the Ministry of Rights in her sleeves, Ning Shu smiled and prepared to send the old man off with her eyes. Xiao Minglan had just taken 2 steps when he suddenly turned his head and asked curiously, "That's right. When we were playing mahjong just now, this prince heard the people downstairs talking about the case of Xianqing Temple. You took a fancy to Nanping Wang's heir and planned it. Is it true?" Ning Shu, ha 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 ha, this prince was just joking with you. How could this case be done by you? However, why is your face red? Could it be that you really took a fancy to Nanping Wang's heir? Originally, Ning Shu's face was not red. However, when this old man in his early 30s said that her face was red, the corner of her mouth twitched and she turned her face away speechlessly. Don't be shy. One of you is unmarried, and the other is about to get married. One of you has just lost your future wife, while the other has lost her 3rd husband. There's no one else in the entire capital who is more compatible than you two. Are you sure you don't want to consider it? Xiao Minglan looked at the 2 of them and teased them. The mole under her eye was especially vivid. The blush on Ning Shu's face deepened, and she couldn't help but say in embarrassment, "Your Highness Prince Ku. I already said that I was just joking. Why did you take it seriously? All right, I won't tease you anymore. I'm going back now." Xiao Minglan laughed heartily when he finally got the reaction that he had been waiting for. He went downstairs in satisfaction. Ning Shu let out a long sigh of relief after the devil incarnate had really left. She quickly raised her hand and fanned herself a few times to cool down the inexplicable heat on her face. Ning Shu cleared her throat and turned around, pretending to be relaxed as she said, "Haha, Your Highness Prince Ku really likes to joke." Really, however, she didn't expect that Xiahou Qing was standing behind her. When she turned around, she almost bumped into his arms. She subconsciously retreated, but forgot that there was a staircase behind her. She stumbled and almost fell down, but was caught by a hand in time. She raised her head in shock. All she could see was his jade-white face, his handsome nose, and the almost perfect curve of his chin. Her heart unconsciously skipped a beat. The temperature on her face that had just gone down seemed to be rising again. Moreover, this trend was as steep as climbing a mountain. She was stunned for a moment and quickly steadied herself. She escaped from his palm and stood at the same level as him. After his palm was empty, Xiahou Qing gently pinched the tip of his finger and took it back. His eyebrows were still wrinkled as he said, "Impudent." Ning Shu awkwardly rubbed the tip of her nose and said, "This little girl will definitely pay attention next time. Many thanks to Your Highness for saving this little girl's life again. Anyway, it's already late. Your Highness must be tired from running around today. How about you go back to your residence early and rest? This little girl will respectfully send Your Highness off." Her waist that was grabbed by him just now felt like it was on fire. She smiled and bowed, wanting to quickly end this awkward situation. However, she saw that Xiahou Qing was as steady as Mount Tai, standing in front of her motionless. "Do you want to see?" He suddenly opened his mouth. A wisp of wind came in from outside the open window and slightly lifted the end of the brocade cloth that covered his eyes. Ning Shu blinked her eyes and didn't understand. "Eh? See what?" His voice was low and smooth, like jade and jade. "Last time you said that if you can successfully solve this case, you want to see my eyes." Chapter 238. The floor below was filled with people. Some were marveling at how high the standard of old Princess Yu's funeral was, but for some reason, she would not be buried in the same grave as old Prince Yu. Some were discussing how Southern Yang's envoy had come to the capital to ask for the princess's hand in marriage. His Majesty seemed to have sent the 13th princess for political marriage. Some were whispering that imperial concubine Qi had personally witnessed her niece die an unnatural death and that her mind was not normal. The discussion was lively. Upstairs, only 2 zhong away, Ning Shu's stunned eyes clearly reflected Xiahou Qing's calm face. Her palms couldn't help but heat up and sweat seeped out. She had always boasted that her face was as thick as a mountain, but at this moment, she actually felt a rare sense of helplessness. This sense of helplessness came too unexpectedly, making it hard for her to deal with. She had always been clever and had an outstanding memory. Naturally, she remembered that not long ago, when she sat in his carriage in a half-conscious state, she had boldly made a request. She just didn't think that he would really come to fulfill his promise. "Do you want to see?" These 3 words beat back and forth in her heart like a rattle drum, urging her to make a decision. Should she look or not look? Should she nod or shake her head? If she shook her head, it would seem that she was guilty of something and didn't dare to look into his eyes. But if she nodded, it would seem that she really coveted his beauty. If she had known that her careless words would cause her to fall into this situation, she would have sewn her mouth shut at that time. She was racking her brains to think of the best response. His hand had already reached over. First, he vaguely grabbed her shoulder, then slowly moved down her shoulder to her elbow and wrist. Finally, he pinched her wet and warm palm and simply pulled it over. The black brocade was as smooth as water silk. With a gentle lift, it fell to the ground like a piece of black hair. At this moment, her heartbeat forgot the rhythm of her heartbeat. Time slowed down to the extreme. Ning Shu opened her eyes wide and slowly looked at the pair of eyes that slowly appeared under the brocade. It was as expected. His long eyelashes were as black as ink, and his eyes were like dots of lacquer. With just a glance, one would feel that the world was magnificent. Half of it was condensed in those eyes, making one's heart beat faster. Unexpectedly, he felt heartache. He felt heartache that such a beautiful pair of eyes lacked the supreme elegance that they should have. Shock and regret mixed together, making Ning Shu stunned and speechless for a long time. After not hearing her voice for a long time, Xiahou Qing frowned slightly. What's wrong? Is it ugly? He let go of Ning Shu's hand, turned his face to the side, and motioned in the direction of Hui Mo to pick up the brocade and cover himself again. He mocked himself. Are my eyes as lifeless as those of a dead fish? Ning Shu came back to her senses and hurriedly said, No, Your Highness misunderstood. It's very beautiful. She paused, then solemnly repeated, Your Highness' eyes are very, very beautiful. She lowered her head and pondered seriously. Moreover, such heavenly eyes, such an otherworldly person, shouldn't be damaged by anything, not even the plum blossom kiss. If she raised her head at this moment, she would discover that Xiahou Qing seemed to be pleased by something. The corners of his mouth rose, revealing a slight smile. It was like the first dragonfly flying across the pond in summer. Every shallow ripple was gentle. After leaving the chasing cloud and moon chasing tower, Ning Shu rode in the carriage of Prince Nanping's residence and stopped at the entrance of the Duke's residence. Jumping down from the carriage, Ning Shu turned around and said, Tomorrow, Hui Mo and I will disguise ourselves as officials from the Ministry of Rites and see if we can find an opportunity to examine old Princess Yu's body. Therefore, I will have to trouble Your Highness to lend Hui Mo to me. In addition, who was old Princess Yu's close friends when she was alive and where she often went? I will have to trouble Your Highness to send more people. The plum blossom kiss in her hand can't appear out of thin air. Chapter 239. The first person to die from the plum blossom kiss was none other than the previous emperor. If old Princess Yu was the one who had the plum blossom kiss from the start, then the one who benefited from the poisoning of the previous emperor wasn't Prince Yu's estate or her, but Jin Sheng, who had indirectly caused her tragedy. This didn't make sense. Therefore, someone must have given her the poison. That person might have even been secretly encouraging her to take revenge for Wen Siren and herself, and provided her with many conveniences. For example, the expert in imitating handwriting who had been involved in 2 cases but never revealed his true identity. According to Xiahou Qing's investigation, after the third prince, Xiao Yunyang, fell from power, a strategist in his estate, who was usually dressed in grey, disappeared without a trace. Xiao Yunyang later confessed that the strategist had given him many suggestions and bewitched him. Even the seeds of the 100 charm incense were brought by that strategist. That strategist had obviously been hiding in the third prince's estate for many years. His master had been imprisoned and was waiting to be executed, but he had escaped unscathed. This was obviously a trap set up around Xiao Yunyang, using his vigorous ambition to plot against him. That's right, the 100 charm incense was even used on the beauties presented to His Majesty. Ning Shu couldn't help but feel a chill run down her spine when she heard this. A strategist who had just surfaced had such great ability and caused such a huge disaster. Then, what kind of powerful person was the one who was controlling everything behind the scenes? Previously, she had analyzed with Xiahou Qing that the plum blossom kiss in Yu Zhao's hands should have been obtained after she entered the palace. Then, who was that person hiding in the palace? From Xiahou Qing, to her, Ning Shu, Xiao Yunyang, and then to Consort Qi. The goals of the people behind the scenes were many and varied. It made one unable to make heads or tails of them. At the same time, it made one feel as if there was a blade at one's back. She had to be fast, faster. Otherwise, no one would be able to predict what would happen next. Perhaps it was for the dignity of the imperial family, or perhaps it was to make up for the tragedy that had indirectly caused old Princess Yu's life. His Majesty ordered that old Princess Yu's funeral etiquette was almost the same as that of the old concubine in the palace. In the past, old Princess Consort Yu loved to host all kinds of banquets in the huge Prince Yu's residence. She would invite the nobles of the capital to join in the fun. However, at this moment, the place was covered in mourning. The laughter of the past had been completely replaced by mournful music. Due to the unexpected death of old Princess Yu, there was no set of clothes prepared beforehand. Thus, the Ministry of Rites hurriedly sent someone to measure the size so that they could quickly sew it day and night. This was to avoid delaying old Princess Yu's funeral and making His Majesty unhappy. Ning Shu and Hui Mo blended into the crowd and followed the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rites into Prince Yu's residence. As if they had already foreseen the outcome of being buried with old Princess Yu, the entire residence was filled with cries of grief. Only one person dressed in mourning clothes knelt quietly in front of old Princess Yu's coffin. She did not move and only stared blankly at the brazier in front of the coffin, where old Princess Yu's coffin was placed. In a single night, this beautiful princess was forced to grow up in solitude. In the past, even though she had lost her mother, she still had someone to rely on. She could still pretend to be arrogant in front of others. However, from that day onwards, even though she had the title of princess, there was no one who could protect her anymore. And this girl would never have the chance to know how much her own grandmother had endured, and how much she had protected her. Ning Xu lowered her head slightly and sighed softly. She walked past Xiao Zhongping and took out a soft measuring rope. After kneeling in front of old Princess Yu with Hui Mo and 2 other officials from the Ministry of Rites, she stepped forward to measure old Princess Yu's body. Chapter 240. Because the weather was getting warmer, they placed a circle of ice basins around the coffin to lower the temperature for fear that old Consort Yu's body would rot. Ning Xu shivered when she approached the coffin. In addition, the bottom of the coffin was covered with a thick layer of lime to prevent moisture. Ning Xu and Hui Mo looked at each other and started to work. Naturally, they couldn't use a knife on the body and could only roughly examine the surface. They had to be careful and fast. Fortunately, Hui Mo was experienced in this area and Ning Xu was covering for them, so they didn't attract anyone's attention. When they were done, Ning Xu and the others bowed and knelt before leaving. When they were about to leave, the palace sent a mema over. The elderly mema looked at the mourning around and then looked up and down at the mourning dress that Xiao Zhongping insisted on wearing. She frowned and thought for a while before persuading her patiently, 13th Princess, His Majesty has summoned you back to the palace. There are so many things waiting for you to do in the marriage alliance. You should hurry back with us. What are you waiting for me for? Xiao Zhongping didn't raise her head and said stiffly, in your eyes, in Father Emperor's eyes, I'm just a puppet with an empty body. I'm just waiting for the time to come so that I can be carried out of the palace alive to southern Yang. As for the rest, you can do whatever you want. I don't care. Go and tell Father Emperor, I accept my fate. I don't have any other thoughts. I just want to accompany old Consort Yu for a few more days before she is buried. From the shock and disbelief she felt when she heard the news yesterday to today when she saw old Princess Consort Yu's corpse, she was in a daze. She was still in a dream and refused to believe that everything that was happening in front of her was real. But whether she believed it or not, the only old woman in the world who could make her lie on her knees and act coquettishly had completely left her. The mama said awkwardly, but the marriage alliance is a joyous event. If you keep staying here, I'm afraid it will affect your happiness. It will be very inauspicious for you. Also, you are a princess. Only the concubines in the palace can wear this mourning dress when they are dead. Your dress is really not in accordance with the etiquette. If His Majesty knows, he will punish you. Her words directly angered Xiao Zhongping. She raised her head and laughed, but it was uglier than crying. Punishment. Punish him. From the moment I was born until now, other than my imperial mother and old Princess Yu, no one has ever taken me seriously. Imperial father has never even hugged me since I was young. Now that he needs someone to marry him, he suddenly remembered that he has a daughter like me. The southern Yang kingdom was 1,000 miles away, and once they left, they would not be able to return. Was there a heavier punishment in this world than this? If you do, feel free to call me over. I, Xiao Zhongping, will be waiting. These rebellious words frightened everyone present to the point that they knelt on the ground, not daring to say a word. Ning Xu deliberately slowed down her footsteps and looked at her with pity. She couldn't help but think of herself in her previous life. 372 people in Duke Ning's household were beheaded one by one in front of her. She held her father and mother's corpses tightly and wailed loudly. However, someone kindly reminded her not to cry out, otherwise she would provoke the emperor's displeasure and be punished again. At that time, her state of mind was no different from Xiao Zhongping's now. She wanted nothing more than to accompany her loved ones to the Yellow Springs, but she couldn't. That mama was frightened by Xiao Zhongping's rebellious words and hurriedly reprimanded, Your Highness the Princess, you don't dare to say that. This is rebellious. Your Highness should quickly follow this servant back to the palace and ask for forgiveness from the Emperor. Before that mama could finish her words, a small stone suddenly hit her knee, causing her to kneel down with a ayo. She prostrated herself on the ground and cried out in pain. Seeing this, Xiao Zhongping felt a little better. After sneering, she ignored it and continued to stand vigil for old Princess Yu. She lowered her head and suddenly found a small ball of paper in front of her. It came out of nowhere, as if it had fallen from the sky. She picked it up and opened it. When she saw 9 words written on it, her tears fell like rain. May my Zhongping be free for the rest of her life. Chapter 241. When old Princess Consort Yu took the poison to commit suicide, she didn't say anything else. She only said the last 9 words to Ning Shu, who was closest to her. She was trapped in the shackles of Princess Consort Yu for her entire life. Every day, she tried her best to pretend to be the most respected princess consort in the world while stepping on her real self. Every day felt like a year. Her only daughter was trapped in the cage-like harem and was bullied until she died. Thus, she didn't have any other wishes. She only hoped that her most cherished granddaughter could obtain the most luxurious freedom. Because that was the dream that she had been trapped in for 38 years. What did you find? After leaving Prince Yu's estate, Ning Shu used the excuse of leaving the Ministry of Rights team and pulled Hui Mo to a hidden corner. With so many pairs of eyes watching, I couldn't investigate in detail. Thus, I could only make a rough guess. I didn't find anything related to the plum blossom kiss. I only found a wound on her finger. It seemed like she bit it herself. I don't know why. In addition, her lower limbs were swollen and her organs were as hard as rocks. There were many purple scars on her arms and neck. This means that old Princess Consort Yu was seriously ill when she was alive. Even if she took medicine every day to save her life, she probably wouldn't live past this autumn. The last bit of doubt in her heart was solved. Ning Shu finally understood. No wonder she was in such a hurry to take revenge. Even if she revealed a flaw, she wouldn't care. Because if she didn't hurry up, she wouldn't have another chance. At this moment, old Princess Consort Yu's soul should have passed through the gates of hell and stepped onto the road to the yellow springs filled with red spider lilies. Then, was she satisfied now? She would only know the answer when she saw her in the future. Ning Shu thought for a moment and said, Can you detect the poison from where she bit her finger? Hui Mo spread out his hands. No, I secretly used a silver needle to test it. There was no abnormality. Perhaps she was too angry and bit it in a fit of anger. She's already dead. No one can say for sure what the reason is. After working for half a day, this result was within Ning Shu's expectations. However, she still felt disappointed. It seemed like this was destined to be an unsolved case. Ning Shu thanked Huemo and said goodbye to him. During this period of time, her whole body was tense. No matter how flexible a rope was, it would break after a long time. She had to take a break first before thinking about other ideas. She yawned and returned to her residence to rest. Forsythia considerately massaged her shoulders and waist, making her feel so comfortable that she almost fell asleep. Just as he was about to take a half-hour nap, someone suddenly knocked on the door of the public house. A sharp voice interrupted Ning Shu's beautiful dream. Her Majesty summons Miss Ning Shu of the Ning family to the palace for an audience. Hearing the news, Princess Hixin rushed over. She hurriedly gave a signal with her eyes and ordered a servant to bring a heavy embroidered pouch, which she stuffed into the hands of the imperial edict eunuch. She said with a laugh, Dare I ask Gonggong, do you know why the Empress Nyang summoned my daughter? My daughter is young and clumsy, so it's better for me to be prepared in advance so as not to offend your highness. In the past, the imperial edict eunuch would always accept the embroidered pouch, but today, he put on a professional posture and threw the embroidered pouch on the ground. How could I dare to guess the Empress Nyang's thoughts? The Phoenix imperial decree summons Lady Ning, so Lady Ning should just go. Is there a need to explain the reason to you? I advise you not to let the Empress Nyang wait for too long. He Xin's heart was soaked in cold water. Ning Shu patted her mother's hand comfortingly and said with a smile, "Mother, don't worry. The Empress Nyang is benevolent. Daughter will definitely come back safely." She whispered a few words in He Xin's ear and finally coaxed Ning Shu to let go of her hand. She followed the impatient eunuchs into the palace. It was still the Phoenix Algae Palace, the same place Ning Shu had knelt before. She tidied her skirt and knelt on the ground. "My daughter Ning Shu greets your highness." The Empress Nyang sat on the phoenix chair and casually waved her hand to have her rise. She looked at her with a warm smile. "Guess, why did Ben Gong summon you into the palace today?" Her expression made Ning Shu think back to that cold night. Empress Cow had come in a carriage and looked at her as she climbed out of the lotus stream and said those words. That bone-chilling coldness slowly crawled back to her back. Ning Shu lowered her eyes and said, "Asking Nyang to forgive my daughter for being stupid and not being able to guess." Empress Cow smiled and ordered people to bring the prepared items in front of Ning Shu. She said generously, "Since you can't guess, Ben Gong won't make it difficult for you. But you have to guess the next riddle carefully. Look at the 2 cups of wine in front of you. Guess which of the 2 cups of wine is poisoned and which isn't." Chapter 242. This was the place where the crazy Empress Ju had killed the crown prince of the previous dynasty. Ning Shu stood here once again. There were 2 cups of fine wine in front of her. The light pink wine gave off an alluring sweet fragrance. On the phoenix chair, Empress Cow looked at Ning Shu and said slowly, "Guess which cup is not poisoned. Drink that cup. If you are lucky enough to guess correctly, Ben Gong will let you walk out of this Phoenix Algae Palace unharmed. If you guess incorrectly, then don't blame Ben Gong. Also, don't think that someone will come to speak for you this time. Ben Gong has already ordered that no one is allowed to take half a step into the Phoenix Algae Palace. It's a 50-50 chance. Whether you live or die, it's all in your hands. Choose." Ning Shu couldn't help but bitterly smile inside. It's all in her hands. If she really had the right to choose, could she not choose any cup and just turn around and leave? The answer was naturally no. Therefore, this so-called "it was all in her hands" was nothing more than a joke. Before, she could still hope for Xiahou Qing, but this time, the Empress had clearly cut off all her hopes. She looked down at the 2 cups of wine that looked identical. Her back was covered in a chill. The same wine cup, the same color, and even the smell were the same. She had no choice. And her life and death was tied to these 2 cups of wine. Ning Shu slowly exhaled from the bottom of her heart. She bowed and said, "This girl has decided. This girl will not guess which cup and will allow Empress to bestow the wine." This unexpected answer caused Empress Cow to raise an eyebrow. She curled her lips and said coldly, "If Ben Gong makes a choice for you, then you will definitely die. You don't even want this 50-50 chance." Ning Shu raised her head and said word by word in a tone that was neither servile nor overbearing, "If Empress really wants to kill me, then no matter which cup I choose, I will not be able to escape. So this girl will not guess and there is no need to guess. But Empress, this girl does not understand one thing. This girl has not offended you, so why do you want this girl's life? Please let Ning Shu die knowing the truth." Empress Cow laughed. Her laughter was particularly clear and loud in this spacious and empty palace. "Smart, you are indeed very smart. That's right, these 2 cups of wine have been poisoned by me. No matter which cup you choose, you are destined to die on the spot." Ning Shu didn't feel the slightest bit lucky that she managed to save her life. Instead, it made her even more frightened. It seemed that Empress Cow really wanted to kill her today. What should she do? What to do? Empress Cow bent down and looked down at Ning Shu. Her eyes were as gentle and magnanimous as ever, and there was even a hint of pity in them. "You're right. You didn't offend me. You could even say that you helped me solve the Phoenix Terrace case and made a great contribution. Besides, you're smart enough to know what to say and what not to say. To be fair, you even look a little similar to this consort when she was younger. Whenever this consort sees you, it often reminds this consort of herself from back then. If I could easily erase you from this world, it would be a bit of a pity. It's a pity that the one who wants you dead this time isn't anyone else, but His Majesty. There's really nothing I can do." After saying this, Empress Cow sighed regretfully and waved her hand. The palace maid holding the poisoned wine took a step forward and raised the 2 cups of poisoned wine even higher, bringing it to Ning Shu's eyes. "Lady Ning, please. You have to thank the Empress for being merciful and leaving you with an intact corpse." Ning Shu clenched her fists tightly and looked at the thing in front of her without moving. Her mind spun furiously as she tried to think of a way to save her little life. But her mind was empty. There was nothing. It was as if she had been forced to a dead end and had one foot on the edge of a cliff. There was no way to retreat. The only thing she could do was accept her fate. "It seems that your eldest miss refuses a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Then this servant can only serve you." The palace maid sneered and gave a look to the side. Another palace maid immediately came forward and prepared to suppress Ning Shu and force the wine into her mouth. These 2 people were clearly skilled in martial arts. Ning Shu's 3-legged cat was completely powerless in front of them. The wine cup was about to touch her lips. In that instant, Ning Shu suddenly thought of a solution and said loudly, "Has Empress not thought of a problem? This subject's daughter is only an insignificant person. If His Majesty wants this subject's death, it's only a matter of a word. Why does His Majesty want Empress to do it for him?" Chapter 243. Her heart thumped and her body froze like a rock. Ning Shu ordered herself to raise her head and look at Empress Cow with the most fervent gaze, looking at her last sliver of life. She had died 7 times before, so death was nothing out of the ordinary for her. But in this life, it was too rare. This once-in-a-thousand-years opportunity allowed her to return to the starting point. She hadn't been able to prevent Duke Ning's tragedy, nor had she been able to help Xiahou Qing solve the mystery of the plum blossom kiss. She hadn't had time to change anything. She wouldn't allow herself to die so easily. Absolutely not. The palace maid next to her laughed and said, "Why did His Majesty ask Her Highness to do it for him? Isn't this a simple question?" "Because His Majesty trusts Her Highness." Ning Shu raised her eyebrows and curled her lips. She said in a mysterious tone, "Is it really just trust? My daughter doesn't think so." The palace maid frowned, thinking that she had seen through her trick. "Then what else could it be? I think it's just that you're about to die, but you're still trying to use your glib tongue to make a last-ditch struggle. You're overestimating yourself." At this moment, Ning Shu no longer had any fear. She smiled coldly. "Perhaps my daughter is overestimating herself. But after my death, Her Highness might not know the real reason." Empress Cow, who was sitting on the high floor, raised her eyes to admire her obvious performance. It was as if she was looking at an insignificant ant. She snorted and said with disdain, "You want to trick Ben Gong with such a clumsy method of provocation?" Meeting her cold gaze, Ning Shu's eyes seemed to be burning with fire. "Her Highness is wise. Naturally, you can see through my daughter's goal. But in any case, my daughter is going to die. It's only a matter of time before she dies. It will only delay Her Highness a little bit. What is there to be concerned about? Or is it that Her Highness doesn't dare to listen?" At this moment, she had changed from her previous respectful and timid appearance. She was showing off her ability, which made Empress Cow a little interested. The corners of Empress Cow's mouth lifted slightly. She looked at her coldly and didn't say anything for a long time. It wasn't until Ning Shu's heartbeat reached its peak that she finally raised her hand and ordered the eunuchs, Cai Bin, "Let her go first. I would like to hear what kind of flower her silver tongue will bloom." Ning Shu finally grasped the thread that was hanging on her little life. She rubbed her wrist that was hurting from being pinched and exhaled silently. She pushed aside the 2 palace servants who had almost killed her just now and walked past the 2 wine cups filled with poison. She slowly walked to the bottom of the stairs closest to Empress Cow. She constantly recalled the tone of Xiahou Qing's voice and then imitated it. Unhurriedly, she said, "Because His Majesty wanted to use me to test Empress." Her words made Empress Cow narrow her eyes, but there was a bone-piercing coldness in her eyes. "Ha, what a joke! Why would His Majesty test this Empress for no reason? If it was any other time, Ning Shu would have immediately knelt down and begged for forgiveness. However, she clearly knew that this move was useless today. The only thing she could do was to use her sharpness to pierce the core. Because whether it is the case of Phoenix Terrace or the case of the cursed horoscope, the one who benefits in the end is none other than you, Her Highness. As expected, Empress Cao was successfully infuriated by her. She slapped the armrest of the Phoenix throne with her hand that was wearing exquisite armor. Empress Cao's low and angry roar pierced through the spacious Phoenix Algae Palace. How dare you? You want to drive a wedge between His Majesty and this Empress? Someone, immediately poison this Ning Shu who is spreading lies to deceive the public. Chapter 244. Before the two palace servants could rush over to capture Ning Shu again, she had already raised her hand and raised her sleeve. If Ning Shu was speaking nonsense, why is Niang so angry? Your reaction just now, doesn't it mean that Ning Shu's words are reasonable? 25 years. In the 25 years since Empress Cao had ascended to the position of Empress, other than the death of the eldest prince, no one in the palace had ever seen the Empress lose her composure like this. Cai Bing thought that the daring Ning Shu would definitely die this time. Perhaps she would die even more tragically than before. However, she never thought that after Ning Shu finished speaking, Empress Cao would look at her deeply. It was like she wanted to see through her thin shell and dig out her exquisite heart. Silence. A deathly silence. As if realizing her momentary loss of composure, Empress Cao pulled back the jade hand that had been on the armrest. In a low voice, she said, Cai Bing, stay. Everyone else, get out of this palace. The palace servants froze for a moment before bowing and retreating. The cinnabar and gold doors were opened and closed. Only a gust of wind came in, allowing Ning Shu to catch her breath. If you want to speak, then this palace will give you the chance to speak. However, you must speak carefully. If you don't speak well, then it won't just be your little life. This palace will have the entire Duke Ning buried with you. A drop of sweat silently slid down her chin and fell to the ground. Ning Shu calmly replied with a yes. Then she slowly began to speak her mind. In the case of Phoenix Terrace, my daughter boldly exposed consort Nguyen Niang's true identity. At the same time, she exposed the third prince's actions to the public. This caused the third prince to be demoted to a commoner and later executed. Of course, this was his own fate. It had nothing to do with Niang. Consort Nguyen was a brothel girl. Although she was pregnant with a dragon's heir, she deserved to die for deceiving the monarch. In the end, he killed himself and did not deserve any sympathy. Thus, in the previous case, 3 people died one after another. They were the eldest prince, Xiao Yunyang, Zhu Yuzhao, who was disguised as Consort Nguyen, and the unborn dragon fetus in her womb. If only this case was closed, His Majesty might not be suspicious of you. But coincidentally, in the case of the cursed horoscope, concubine Qi's niece, Qi Zhanyu, died, and concubine Qi became insane because of it, and Ning Shu paused for a moment before continuing, it's some kind of unknown poison. Although His Majesty took pity on her and promoted her to noble consort, a crazy noble consort is of no use to the 4th prince. Instead, it's equivalent to cutting off one of his arms. When Empress Cao heard her words, she immediately interrupted, the cursed 8 characters case has nothing to do with me. Her subconscious response revealed a message that she was indeed involved in the Phoenix Terrace case. However, Ning Shu clearly understood that when it was time to pretend to be deaf and dumb, she should pretend to be deaf and dumb. Thus, she nodded and said, yes. In this case, Her Majesty did not participate much from beginning to end. Even that day, the Weiyang Palace's selection of heir consort was ordered by His Majesty. You were just following His Majesty's orders. That's why I said it was a coincidence. These 2 cases that happened one after another seemed to be accidents that were caused by insignificant matters and had nothing to do with you. However, in His Majesty's eyes, these dead and injured people all had one thing in common. They were all thorns in His Majesty's side. Especially in His Majesty's heart, these 2 cases were imperceptibly related to the fight for the throne in the future. The 3rd prince was demoted to a commoner and lost the right to fight for the throne. This was without a doubt the first. Consort Nguyen was pregnant with His Majesty's most anticipated child at the time, but this child died with its mother before it was born. He was His Majesty's only son in recent years. Although His Majesty did not say it, it was still a hidden pain in his heart. This was the second. After losing noble consort Chi's guidance, the fourth prince, Xiao Yunsu, was impetuous and arrogant. He would definitely gradually lose the hearts of the court officials. This was the third. Then, after these three strong opponents fell, who was the next in line? Naturally, it was the sixth prince you raised, Xiao Yuni. So, Her Majesty, if these two cases were not done by you, then who was it? And I, Ning Shu, who participated in these two cases and exposed the truth, only have one identity in His Majesty's heart, your accomplice. Chapter 245. Ning Shu's two sentences, one subdued the other, raised the other. The first sentence almost aroused Empress Cao's thunderous rage, but the second sentence promptly placed herself in the same camp as Empress Cao, pulling back the dangerous situation. Saying so much in one breath caused her lungs to ache slightly due to the lack of oxygen. However, she didn't have time to stop for a moment, because her life depended on this moment. She took a deep breath and finished her unfinished words. This subject and Niang both know that this is all a misunderstanding on His Majesty's part. However, the so-called truth is often not what actually happened, but what people are willing to believe. And the truth in His Majesty's heart seems to be different from Niang's. The last sentence was simply a heart-rending words, causing Empress Cao's expression to suddenly change. Her gaze deeply pierced Ning Shu's body, the depths of her eyes surging with gloomy contemplation. Every strand of contemplation hid the shadow of a sword and the light of a knife. Her back had long been soaked with a layer of cold sweat, causing her entire body to feel cold. However, Ning Shu knew that if she showed the slightest bit of timidity or lack of confidence, she would completely lose this game of chess. Because in front of an absolute powerhouse, there was no room for a good-for-nothing. Thus, she straightened her back and quietly welcomed Empress Cao's scrutiny. She was like a green lotus that had just emerged from the water, neither creeping nor branching, graceful and pure. Empress Cao finally stood up and slowly walked up the high platform step by step towards her. She laughed mockingly. So, in order to wash away the suspicion on me, Ben Gong should instead kill you. This subject doesn't think so. Because in this world, there is something called the seed of doubt. Ning Shu's voice was like a vine, seemingly soft but full of tenacity. It invisibly spread throughout the entire palace. She softly said, "This kind of thing is soundless and formless, but it is the most terrifying thing in the world. Because once it is born, no matter how much you swear to the heavens or do your best to prove it, in the eyes of doubters, it will become evidence that you are trying to hide. In Niang's eyes, killing my daughter is to express your sincerity to His Majesty, but in His Majesty's eyes, would it be to silence her? As for whether it is the former or the latter, Your Highness has spent nearly 30 years by His Majesty's side. Your heart should be 10,000 times clearer than my daughter's." Finally, Empress Cao walked in front of her. Her high hair bun was adorned with 9 phoenix hairpins that symbolized the power of the phoenix. Each feather was lifelike and as sharp as a blade, making her look graceful and inviolable. She lowered her eyes and her gaze slid down from Ning Shu's face to her shoulders before sweeping over her body. "According to what you've said, it's wrong for this consort to kill you, but it's also wrong for this consort not to kill you. Instead, it's this consort's turn to be helpless. In order to save your little life, you really did your best." Under this kind of oppressive gaze, Ning Shu slightly bowed as a form of greeting. Niang is too kind. Even an ant would struggle to survive, let alone a person made of flesh and blood. However, my daughter is even more clear that if I don't have the ability to satisfy Niang, even if I can use my glib tongue to temporarily save my life, I will definitely die in the future. The words she had said today, no matter which one was picked out, would be considered disgraceful. It would be like handing the other party a knife to stab at her. But she had no other choice. She could only take the risk and rely on these heart-wrenching words to surrender to the Empress. She wanted to see if she could move this Empress who looked gentle but was actually cold-blooded. Ning Shu had thoroughly tasted the feeling of a day passing like a year today. It seemed like a long time had passed, but it also seemed like an instant. The Empress finally finished looking over Ning Shu. She turned around and returned to her phoenix seat. She supported her chin with her hand and softly said, "You girl, you've thought things through more thoroughly than I have. Then, in your opinion, how should this consort's current predicament be resolved?" The turning point she had been waiting for had finally arrived. Ning Shu's heart fell back into her chest and she tightly clenched her fists under her sleeves. She had made the right bet. She had guessed correctly. Although Empress Cao and His Majesty had been husband and wife for nearly 30 years and seemed to be harmonious and close, in reality, they were already riddled with holes. While His Majesty was suspicious of Empress Cao also had disloyalty in her heart. Otherwise, how could wave after wave of His Majesty's favored concubines silently disappear in the harem for so many years? How did His Majesty's young princes, who were waiting to be born or just born, die? No matter how meticulously the Empress took care of it, it could not change the fact that His Majesty had not taken the initiative to step into the Phoenix Algae Palace for 10 years except on the first day of each month. As the saying went, there were no husband and wife in the royal family. This was probably the case. There was only the struggle for power and scheming against each other. As for that thin layer of friendship, it was like a piece of cotton paper stuck to the window lattice, easily broken with a light poke. Just like her and Xiao Yuni, who had turned against each other and became enemies in that life. Chapter 246. Ning Shu said sincerely, "Many thanks for your Highness' trust. This humble girl believes that there is only one way to dispel His Majesty's current suspicions, and that is to ask your Highness and His Highness the Sixth Prince to conceal their strength and bide their time." How do we conceal our strength and bide our time? For example, your Highness can apply for medical leave and leave the harem in the care of the grand concubines. Another example is that His Highness the Sixth Prince recently obtained the authority to command 30,000 Yongchengwei. Ning Shu carefully observed every subtle expression on Empress Cao's face and hurriedly explained, "This humble girl naturally knows that this authority was not easily obtained and that His Highness the Sixth Prince used his life to obtain it. It would be a pity to give it up so easily. However, your Highness must know that there is a move called retreating in order to advance. Temporarily retreating now is for the sake of pursuing victory in the future. Moreover, His Majesty's birthday is approaching. His Highness the Sixth Prince can use the excuse of congratulating His Majesty on his birthday to take the initiative to hand over his authority and go to the ancestral temple to copy scriptures. This way, not only will you fully express your attitude to His Majesty, but you will also expose His Highness the Sixth Prince's filial piety to His Majesty. When His Majesty's suspicions about your Highness and His Highness the Sixth Prince are completely eliminated, why worry about Yongchengwei not returning to His Highness the Sixth Prince's hands? Perhaps, you will also receive unexpected compensation from His Majesty. It sounds absurd, but it does make some sense. Empress Cao thought about it for a moment. It was clear that she had taken Ji Yunshu's words to heart. A moment later, she turned her gaze back to Ji Yunshu. Her sharp armor slowly tapped on the armrest a few times. "But, how should this Empress deal with you? If I let you safely leave my Phoenix Algae Palace, wouldn't this consort be violating His Majesty's orders?" As expected, she still couldn't escape this Dao tribulation. Ning Shu bitterly smiled, then bent down and knelt in front of Empress Cao. "This subject's name is Ning Shu. This subject's name is Ning Shu. This subject's name is audacious and arrogant, openly disrespecting the Empress. Furthermore, this subject's wine has been knocked over by the Empress. I ask the Empress to throw this subject's name into prison as a warning to others." The feeling of fabricating a crime for herself was truly a subtle one. However, compared to losing his life, there was at least a chance of survival in prison. The knocking stopped abruptly and Empress Cao's face regained its graceful and kind smile. She sighed slightly and said, "Since that's the case, then this Empress can only agree to your request. Don't worry, if your usefulness is proven, this consort won't let you die so easily. You can stay in prison for a while." Ning Shu silently kowtowed. Thank you, Empress, for your mercy. The tightly shut door made a creaking sound as it slowly opened behind her. A wisp of cold wind entered the oppressive hall, brushing against her back that was already soaked in sweat, causing her to shiver all of a sudden. Looking at the bright light that slipped into the hall at the same time as the cool wind, Ning-Shu couldn't help but feel deeply moved. Before she entered the palace, she had repeatedly promised her mother that she would return home safely. Unexpectedly, not only had she broken her promise, she had also become a prisoner. How was she going to explain this? Ning-Shu, Ning-Shu. Ever since you were reborn, everything you've experienced has been too smooth, making you unconsciously blindly confident. It's good to learn a lesson this time. As she comforted herself in her heart and prepared to leave, she heard Empress Cow's deep and unfathomable voice again. How much do you know about the plum blossom kiss? Ning-Shu's figure suddenly paused, but she reacted quickly and immediately knelt down again. She said with sincerity, "This subject's daughter doesn't know much. This subject's daughter only accidentally saw a few words in the case records left behind by my late master. It said that this poison is colorless and odorless and is the most terrifying poison in the world. It seems that as the poison deepens, it will grow into a shape similar to a flower. It is very strange. Other than this subject's daughter doesn't know anything else." When she finally walked out of the Phoenix Algae Palace, Ning-Shu's vision darkened and she almost couldn't keep her feet steady. Because twice, in that extravagant and cold palace, she had almost brushed shoulders with the King of Hell twice. Chapter 247. The palace servants guarding outside the hall could not guess the great waves in her heart at this moment. They were all shocked at what kind of magic this Lady Ning had to be able to escape death from the Empress again. She could be considered a strange person. However, this strange man still ended up in prison. The palace servants sighed as they tied up Ning-Shu and sent her to prison. In the past 7 lifetimes, she had been an animal, a beggar, skinned alive, and suffered from the cold and hunger. Even in the 7th lifetime, she had been thrown out as bait by Xiao Yunyi's reincarnation. Before it was her turn to go to jail, she had already been cut into 1,000 pieces and executed on the spot. So for Ning-Shu, the experience of being in prison was really the first time a girl had entered a bridal sedan chair. It was very refreshing. The air of the Ministry of Justice's prison was filled with the smell of blood all year round. This nauseating smell had already seeped into the texture of every wall in this prison and could not be washed away. Passing through one rusty iron door after another, Ning-Shu was pushed into the deepest cell in the prison with shackles on. The iron lock was ruthlessly locked. Ning-Shu looked around and immediately smiled bitterly. Because her neighbor was none other than her old friend, the former third Prince Xiao Yunyang. This treatment was so high that the old men of the Ministry of Justice thought too highly of her. Now there was something to reminisce about. As expected, Xiao Yunyang, who had been sitting with his back to the prison door, when he found that the new neighbor was her, his fighting spirit was aroused. With a bang, he pounced at her and tightly grabbed the iron bar separating them. He angrily cursed, "It's you. You bitch. It's you who ruined everything for me. I'm going to strangle you to death. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to tear you to pieces." Facing the neighbor's overly enthusiastic greeting, Ning-Shu politely declined and distanced herself. She shook her wrist that was in pain from the shackles and slowly said, "How does the third prince want my daughter to die? It's better to think about it first before making a decision. After all, my daughter only has one life. Take your time to think about it. My daughter is tired and will rest for a while. Later, I will accompany you to reminisce." Xiao Yunyang was so angry that he almost vomited blood. The jailer originally wanted to stay and watch the show. There had been all kinds of people in the prison of the Ministry of Justice. There were robbers who killed people like Scything Flax, and there were also relatives of the emperor who offended the emperor. Most of them were either disheartened or scolded crazily after coming in. There were also some who couldn't bear the despair in their hearts and silently hanged themselves with a belt. It was really boring to see too many of them. It was rare to see such a beautiful woman, and he was waiting to see how this beauty would turn pale and sob in fear. He didn't expect that although she looked delicate, She was actually more valiant than those outlaws who killed and robbed. She actually yawned unhurriedly, and then chose a relatively clean haystack to lie down and make up for her interrupted afternoon nap. He was quite a character. The jailer quickly made a judgment in his heart. He decided that it was best not to provoke this rumored Lady Ning. Less than an hour later, in the background of Xiao Yunyan's horse cursing, Ning Shu finally recovered enough energy to open her eyes. She looked at the only small window in the cell that could be ventilated. Based on the intensity of the light, she roughly estimated the time. Ever since she came out of the Phoenix Algae Palace, the news that she had been locked in the prison of the Ministry of Justice should have already reached the Fu. Father must be anxiously thinking of a way to save her. She didn't know if her mother's weak body had been stimulated by the news. In addition, Xiahou Qing was very well informed. Nothing that happened in the capital could escape his ears, so he should have begun to act. For some reason, she and Xiahou Qing had only known each other for a little more than a month, but she was inexplicably certain that Xiahou Qing would not sit by and watch her fall into trouble. Absolutely not. Chapter 248. Pain. It had been a long time since she had felt this kind of pain. 1 strike, 2 strikes, 3 strikes. The Ministry of Justice's special solid wooden sticks were made from heavy yellow rosewood. 1 strike was enough to split open a person's skin. Fortunately, the Empress had given special care. The jailer had wrapped the wooden sticks in a thick layer of cotton before the execution, but each strike still caused Ning Shu to break out in a cold sweat. Then the next strike, she was covered in sweat. Not long after, Ning Shu's body was soaked in cold sweat. She couldn't help but start to tremble from the accumulated pain. Ning Shu gritted her teeth and silently endured the punishment for offending the Phoenix countenance. When the 20 strikes were over, she was dizzy. She couldn't even stand up. Her knees gave out and she fell to the cold hard ground. After the execution, the jailer said with a cold smile, "Get up quickly. It's only been a few strikes and you can't take it anymore. You really are a delicate young miss." Ning Shu raised a trembling hand to wipe away the fine layer of sweat on her forehead. She forced herself to stand up and walk back to her cell step by step. She had a bitter smile on her face. 3 days. She had already endured this kind of punishment for 3 whole days. When she had stepped into the prison of the Ministry of Justice, she had already prepared herself. Even if it was for the sake of acting, the Empress would still give her a light punishment. But she hadn't thought that this light punishment would last for 3 days. Even though Cao, who had already given her some face and ordered people to wrap cotton around the wooden sticks, the bruises from the first day had not yet faded. Then came the second day. The 3 days almost took half of Ning Shu's little life. She knew that there was a warning from the Empress in this. If you were to ask a tiger for its skin, you had to be prepared to deal with the tiger's teeth. This iron-blooded Empress was never an easy person to deal with. 3 days ago, she had been speculating whether it would be her father or Xiahou Qing who would come to save her first. But as time passed, no matter how sure she was, she began to have doubts as time passed. Could it be? No, there was no could it be. The more the situation was like this, the more she couldn't have doubts. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to endure the rest of her days. She kept telling herself to believe in her own judgment, to believe in the people she trusted, to believe in her father, and to believe in Xiahou Qing. He had to believe it. It was a short journey, but it took her the time it took for an incense stick to burn. When she finally returned to the cage, she collapsed on the pile of grey hay and took a deep breath. Beside her, Xiao Yunyang had enough of watching her make a fool of herself. However, at this time, Ning Shu did not even have the strength to bicker with him. She could only let him be. She mocked herself in her heart. Every dog has its day. Look, she's the unlucky one now. The cell door that had just been locked made a creaking sound. Ning Shu's heart skipped a beat and she looked up, but the next moment, the anticipation in her eyes was extinguished. Because the person who came wasn't anyone she was expecting, but Xiao Yuni. This prince is here on mother's orders to give a lecture. I want to see if this bold Ning Shu knows her mistake. Open the cell door for this prince. The young prince stood in front of the cell with one of his subordinates and lifted his chin arrogantly. The Ministry of Justice official who accompanied him hurriedly bowed and went forward to open the cell door with a flattering smile to lead the way. When he reached the cell where Ning Shu was locked up, Xiao Yuni waved his hand and motioned for the official to leave. He walked in front of Ning Shu and looked at Ning Shu's miserable appearance in the cell. Something similar to heartache flashed past his eyes. He then took a deep breath and said with a cold expression, "Shu, do you regret it?" Behind the iron bars, Ning Shu slowly stood up. Enduring the pain, she respectfully bowed to him and confessed in a hoarse voice, "This girl greets your Highness Sixth Prince. This girl has boldly offended your Highness the Empress and caused your Highness to be unhappy. My heart is filled with regret. I beg your Highness and your Highness to take into account that this girl is young and ignorant and forgive this girl." Xiao Yuni furrowed his eyebrows and suppressed the anger in his chest as he said mockingly, "You know that I'm not asking about this, but you deliberately distanced yourself from me and got close to Xiahou Qing. Now that you've fallen to such a state, he didn't even plead with father for you. Even after he found out that you were sent to the Ministry of Justice's prison, he closed the door and focused on being his young master in his palace. Only I took the risk to come and see you at such a sensitive time. Do you regret it?" Chapter 249. Xiao Yuni's cold words were like needles stabbing at her, making her heart ache. But she was unwilling to show weakness in front of Xiao Yuni, so she continued to maintain a respectful and distant tone. "Thank you for your concern, Your Highness. But just as Your Highness said, at such a sensitive time, the Empress is doing her best to plan for Your Highness's bright future. Your Highness should not stay here for too long, lest you fail at the last step and fail to live up to the Empress's painstaking efforts." Being pushed away by her again and again, Xiao Yuni's handsome and cold face looked like it had been slapped. His large hand clenched into a fist, the veins on the back of his hand bulging. He walked to the place closest to Ning Shu and said in a low voice, "Shu, you know that as long as you lower your head, I will take you out. Even if it goes against mother's will, why are you not willing? Would you rather stay in this filthy and smelly prison and be beaten with sticks every day than accept my kindness to you?" In the dark prison, even if it was day, it was as quiet as night. Only the few candles on the wall allowed people to roughly see the scene in front of them. But the pain hidden under Xiao Yuni's angry eyes still wormed into Ning Shu's watery eyes. She could not help but sigh slightly, lowering her thick and long eyelashes. "Ning Shu is very grateful for Your Highness's kindness to me, but I have already told Your Highness last time that my daughter's status is low and her reputation is ruined. Please keep a distance from my daughter, Your Highness." Xiao Yuni still refused to give up and asked again, "Are you sure you don't want to go out with me?" Ning Shu bit her lips slightly and said again, "Thank you for your kindness, Your Highness." Xiao Yuni covered his face and laughed self-deprecatingly. "To think that I didn't sleep or rest for the past few days. While dealing with the pressure from father, I still had to send people to search for you. I finally found someone who looks 70% to 80% like you and was prepared to take the risk to set a trap for you to escape. I didn't think that I would only be moved by myself again." A precious ray of light came in from the only small window left on the wall of the cage and fell on the face of the usually proud and aloof young prince. His appearance was half inherited from Jin Sheng and half from his birth mother, Yin Jiaoyi. That vassal prince had presented him. Even in this flourishing harem, he had to admire the beauty of his appearance. However, he was different from Yin Jiaoyi, who was weak and easily bullied. His face was as handsome as a knife, which was hidden in the scabbard when he was enduring, but when he was unsheathed, it was hard and sharp. However, the smile on his face was so bitter that Ning Shu couldn't help but be stunned. He took a deep breath and turned his head away. He took out a white porcelain medicine bottle from his sleeve and threw it in front of Ning Shu. He said in an almost embarrassed manner, "Forget it. Since you have made up your mind, then why should I force you? This is the golden wound medicine I brought for you. If you are seriously injured, remember to apply it. It is made by the Imperial Academy of Medicine, so the effect should be good. I will leave now. Try to take care of yourself." After he finished his last sentence, He turned and left. Ning Shu looked at his back. She wanted to say something, but when she opened her mouth, she didn't say a word. She just bent down and silently picked up the white porcelain medicine bottle that had fallen into the haystack. She suddenly remembered that in the distant first life, from the age of 5 to 15, the most important 10 years of a young girl's life, his figure was always by her side. It was so deep, as if it was engraved into her flesh. Even if she had always deliberately ignored it and deliberately avoided it, it was an unchangeable fact. He was the most important witness in her 7 colored and worry-free years. He was even the one she looked forward to the most in her thousands of dreams. She had deeply believed that he had her in his heart. He had always looked at her with such cherishing and burning eyes. How could he not have her? But, he used the bloody reality to fiercely slap her awake. In this life, how could she allow herself to fall into his trap again? Good things in the world were not firm. Colorful clouds scattered easily. Beautiful dreams were just beautiful dreams. The feelings between men and women, no matter how beautiful and sweet it was at the beginning, it was hard to guarantee that it would not fall into a state of being riddled with holes. Then, should she have completely distanced herself from him from the beginning? Her heart couldn't help but flash another pair of eyes that were shockingly beautiful, but had been stolen away by something else. Ning Shu quickly shook her head, shaking away the image that shouldn't have appeared in her mind. It had already been decided. In this life, she had been reborn. She didn't ask for anything else, she only wanted to protect her family's health. The countdown to 17 was getting shorter and shorter. The time until she saw her family's 372 heads being cut off was getting closer and closer. How could she still have the time to think about other things? As for Xiaoho Qing, they had made an agreement to help each other in the beginning. Then, their relationship could only be maintained as allies. As for the others, Ning Shu silently lowered her eyelashes and clutched her heart. There shouldn't be and couldn't be. Seeing Xiao Yuni coming out, the official from the Ministry of Justice hurriedly went up to greet him with a fawning smile, opening a path for Xiao Yuni along the way. He had seen from afar that His Highness the Sixth Prince seemed to be entangled with that eldest Miss Ning and recalled the rumors he had heard before, so his eyes turned and he went forward to probe. Eldest Miss Ning has committed the crime of disrespecting the Empress. According to reason, she should be flogged 20 times a day as punishment. Your Highness the Sixth Prince, do you think this punishment should be? Xiao Yuni glanced behind him, as if giving her a last chance. As long as she spoke to persuade him to stay, or even show a bit of fear and pleading, it would be good. But there was none at all. There was only the same indifference and calmness as before. Xiao Yuni gave an inexplicable chuckle. When he turned back, his face was full of bone-chilling coldness. He narrowed his eyes. His back was facing the candlelight and no light could reach his face. At this moment, his expression was extremely sinister. He lowered his voice and said slowly, "Since she hasn't admitted her mistake, then we'll do it according to the rules. Just remember not to beat her to death or cripple her, understand?" His expression was so cold that the heart of the official from the Ministry of Justice who was about to come forward to curry favor trembled. He hurriedly lowered his head and said, "Yes, I'll follow your Highness' orders." Xiao Yuni raised his feet and walked out of the prison, a cold smile on his face. "Shu, I gave you a chance. You didn't want it, so you can't blame me for the consequences." Chapter 250. The ointment that Xiao Yuni gave her was indeed good. In the next 4 days, Ning Shu could be considered to have personally experienced the outstanding medical skills of the imperial physicians. The day before, her back was swollen from the beating. That night, she applied some medicine on her back and by the next morning, it would have mostly disappeared. However, not long after, she had to undergo a new round of beatings, causing the bruises that had just disappeared to swell up again. The swelling grew higher and higher. It was said that a tiger would be bullied by a dog, but what was she doing now? Being reduced to a turtle shell in prison? It had been 7 days since she had been locked in prison, but other than Xiao Yuni, no one else had come in. This meant that His Majesty had not relented. To think that she, a mere Ning Shu, was actually so feared by the Emperor of this world, it was truly an honor. Hiss. Ning Shu dug out some ointment and applied it gently on her back as she laughed at herself. After applying the ointment, she wiped away the thin layer of cold sweat on her forehead from the pain. Exhaling softly, she lay on the haystack to rest. Looking down, she smelled really sour. Other than the strong ointment smell, there was a strange smell that came from not bathing for a few days. It was already May and the weather was getting hotter. Even though the prison was colder and more humid than outside, she had not bathed for many days. If this continued, she was going to stink. Disheveled, too disheveled. Even the dignified Duke Ningspark was going to be embarrassed because of her. However, when would these days come to an end? Ning Shu was about to fall asleep in a daze from the pain when she suddenly heard a voice. Miss. This miss was tender and coquettish, worried and sorrowful, mixed with a trembling sobbing voice. Ning Shu was stimulated to the point she shuddered and sobered up as soon as she heard this. Looking up, she found that the person who came was none other than Forsythia. She was carrying a wooden box and following behind Tan Siwei. Between the Ministry of Justice and the Supreme Court, one was in charge of punishment, and the other was in charge of judgment. They had always been close like a family. Tan Siwei, the Shaoqing of the Supreme Court, was also a guarantee. Moreover, he was a flexible person who knew how to conduct himself. He also stuffed money into each of their pockets. Naturally, the prison guards didn't stop them and let them in. Carrying the wooden box, Lian Qiao ran in impatiently. Master has been kneeling outside His Majesty's palace for many days, but he still hasn't received His Majesty's permission to come in and see you. Therefore, this servant had no choice but to plead with the Supreme Court's assistant official Tan to bring this servant in to deliver some food to you while he is interrogating the criminals, and at the same time, to check on you in the prison. Let me take a look. Why did you look so haggard after being in here for a few days? You look thinner than a piece of paper. Her eyes looked up and down Ning Shu's body, and tears flowed down her face as she sobbed. Ah! Ning Shu was silent awkwardly. She thought that although she had suffered some physical pain these days, she would lie down and rest whenever she had time. Although the food in prison did not taste good, it was enough to fill her up. So other than looking a little embarrassed, she did not seem to have lost any weight. As for the so-called thinner than a piece of paper, it was too exaggerated. She covered her face and hurriedly got up with the help of the railing. Although she was in a prison and in such a sorry state, Ning Shu did not lack etiquette. She bent her knees and thanked Tan Siwei solemnly. Thank you for your help, Lord Tan. I will remember it in my heart. If there is a chance in the future, I will repay you generously. Tan Siwei blushed slightly and hurriedly waved his hand. It's just a small matter. Lady Ning, you don't have to take it to heart. You master and servant must have something to say. I won't disturb you here. If there is anything else I can help with, please don't hesitate to ask Lady Ning. Tan Siwei took his leave. Forsythia hurriedly took out the pastries from the first layer of the wooden box and gave them to Ning Shu through the gap in the iron bars. When she got close to Ning Shu and smelled her body odor, she began to sob again. Miss, you stink. What kind of life have you been living these days? My heart hurts. She hurriedly ran to the jailer's side and softly begged, Big brother jailer, my family's young miss has been begging you to make an exception since she was young. Let this servant go in and help my family's young miss change her clothes. It will only take an incense stick's worth of time. A young girl's tears were the world's greatest weapon. With the help of a heavy purse, even a man with a heart of stone couldn't help but waver. The two jailers hesitated for a moment before smacking their lips and saying, all right. Hurry up and go in. Come out immediately after changing your clothes. At most half an incense stick's worth of time. If we delay any longer and our superiors find out, even we will be punished. Forsythia smiled through her tears and hurriedly thanked them. Thank you, brother prison guard. You are really good people. However, my miss is a noble lady. If she changes her clothes in front of men, her reputation will be ruined. Therefore, I have prepared a cloth that will cover the surroundings of the cage later. I hope brother prison guard can understand. The prison guard impatiently waved his hand. All right. Don't talk nonsense. Hurry up and go change your clothes. Women are troublesome. Forsythia thanked him again. She quickly took out a cloth from the box she carried with her and covered the iron cage. Then, she took the set of clean clothes and walked in. Behind the dense cotton cloth, Forsythia wiped the tears on her face and hurriedly said, "Miss, there is not much time. Let me help you change your clothes quickly." "All right." Then, there was the sound of clothes rubbing together. Under the rustling sound, Ning Shu grabbed Forsythia's wrist and wrote on her palm. "What are you doing in here?" Forsythia blinked her eyes blankly and replied, "Miss, what are you talking about?" "Of course, I am here to visit you." Ning Shu silently rolled her eyes and mercilessly exposed her. "Stop acting." Hui Mo clicked her tongue and pouted. She lifted the corner of her skirt and looked at the almost perfect dress in confusion. She whispered in a voice that only the two of them could hear, "Oh, I thought this time I acted very well and there shouldn't be any flaws. How could Lady Ning see through me?" Ning Shu speechlessly twitched the corner of her mouth. What the hell was that crying? If she heard it again, she would have goosebumps. "Let's get down to business. What do you want to do in here?" Oh, right, business." Hui Mo withdrew his frivolous look and hurriedly returned to the main topic. He rubbed his face and put on an extremely solemn expression. Then he opened his palm and wrote stroke by stroke in front of Ning Shu, "My family's Shizi sent me to ask you, are you willing to be the future Shizi Fei of Nanping Wang Fu?" This short sentence made Ning Shu's heart suddenly stop. Chapter 251. Her breathing also stopped at that moment. She was stunned and almost thought that her eyes were playing tricks on her. After a short pause, her heartbeat recovered at an extremely fast speed. It was beating faster and faster, as if it was going to burst out of her heart. The heat in her palm surged up along her blood vessels, causing her cheeks to burn uncontrollably. She clearly didn't feel the wind, but all her thoughts were blown away. She subconsciously clenched her palm and pressed it against her heart. Her long eyelashes trembled unconsciously. The future princess consort of Prince Nanping's mansion, seeing that Ning Shu was stunned and didn't respond, Hui Mo thought that he wrote too quickly and she didn't see it clearly. So he reached out and gently pushed her hand, then wrote again on her palm. That sentence, a total of 15 words, once again appeared in front of her eyes, stroke by stroke. It was like a gust of wind from afar, silently and violently blowing on her heart, not stopping until the spring water in her heart was wrinkled. Ning Shu took a deep breath and silently mouthed, "I saw it clearly." Hui Mo blinked and drew a big question mark, asking her answer, "Yes or no, choose one of the two." Ning Shu gently bit her lower lip. Her thick black eyelashes trembled rapidly and she didn't answer for a moment. Hui Mo looked at her in puzzlement. Did she still need to think about this question? It was simply the simplest question in the world. What kind of person was his Shizi? He had money, power, talent, and appearance. The girls who wanted to marry into Prince Nanping's mansion could line up from the capital all the way to Yunyang province. In his heart, his master was the most unparalleled person in the world. Those ordinary girls were definitely not worthy of him. However, although this Lady Ning's reputation was bad, she had a clever mind and was quick to make decisions. She had solved 2 tangled and complicated mysteries in a row, which made him gasp in amazement. She barely passed. As for her appearance, well, although she was a bit embarrassed now, she would be as bright as a pearl after dressing up a little. When she stood together with his master, they were like a pair of jade. They were very compatible. He was very confident that she would definitely nod. But before he could feel confident for long, she moved her hand away from her chest. She seemed to have made a decision. She raised her head and slowly shook it at him. Hui Mo's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. He lost his voice and said, "Why?" The 3 words that came out of his mouth immediately attracted the attention of the jailer who was guarding outside. "What's wrong? What's going on inside?" "Why? Miss, why did you disrespect Her Majesty the Empress to the point that you suffered such a great crime and suffered so many injuries?" Woo, miss, you should change in the future," the prison guards urged. "Half an incense stick's time is almost up. Hurry up, don't dawdle. Change your clothes and come out immediately. Hui Mo mumbled a few words and glared at Ning Shu with dissatisfaction. But now was not the time to ask. There was not enough time and the place was not right, so he could only sulk. Ning Shu could only quickly write on his palm, "I know that your Shizzy is kind and wants to use this opportunity to save me. However, on the one hand, I have already been feared by His Majesty. Becoming the future Shizzy consort of Nanping Wang's mansion is a chance for me to escape, but for your Nanping Wang's mansion, it will only be a burden." On the other hand, Ning Shu's fingertips paused and a blurred light flashed through her green eyes. Then she continued to write, "Marriage is not a trifling matter. Although I am suffering some physical pain in prison now, my life is not in danger. When the time comes and His Majesty's anger subsides, he should let me out for my father's sake. If in order to save me, His Highness Shizzy consort agreed to the marriage lightly, I will feel guilty." Chapter 252. That person was the most amazing stroke in the painting of mountains and rivers. He was the most refreshing piece of ice under the summer sun. If it was just to save her, she would accept his kindness. But she couldn't accept it. Moreover, she had already decided that before she broke the curse of the 9 clans at the age of 17, completed the covenant with Xiahou Qing, and found the final answer to this series of mysteries, she shouldn't and didn't have time to think about other things. "Well, I reluctantly accept your explanation." Hui Mo pouted, squatted down and quickly took out the tools hidden at the bottom of the wooden box. Then he took out a human skin mask from his chest. "His Highness said that if you don't want to, I will change you. Don't worry, I have already prepared the tools. No one will expose it." Ning Shu frowned, "But the punishment is every day." Hui Mo waved his hand disdainfully. "I have been practicing bone shrinking since I was a child. Every day my bones are broken and remodeled. The few sticks of the Ministry of Justice are hard work for you soft girls, but in my eyes, it is lighter than a bite of an ant. I will just lie here and rest for a few days. If someone comes to interrogate me, I will pretend to be injured and weak. I will try not to move or speak. Don't worry, I will act according to the circumstances." The jailer outside urged again. Hui Mo hurriedly whispered, "Hurry up, don't hesitate. If we are discovered by the jailer, both of us will be finished. I must complete the order given by Shizzy. Otherwise, I will not have the face to go back to see Shizzy. In addition, Shizzy has encountered a problem. I can't do anything outside. He needs your help to solve it." The jailers urged for a long time, but they didn't see anyone coming out. They impatiently went forward to tear the cloth. Finally, the delicate girl came out. "Thank you for waiting for a long time. My miss has changed her clothes." They went forward and carefully looked around. They didn't find any problem. They searched the haystack and the broken quilt again. They didn't find anything extra. Then they said, okay, hurry up and pack up and leave. You shouldn't stay in the Ministry of Justice for so long. There won't be a next time." Therefore, Ning Shu, who was disguised as Forsythia, was driven out. She hadn't seen the sun for 7 days. As soon as she walked out of the Ministry of Justice, Ning Shu was almost blinded by the bright light. She knew that there were several pairs of eyes staring at her from behind. She forced herself to straighten her back so that she didn't show any flaws. It wasn't until she turned a corner and was completely out of the sight of the Ministry of Justice's guards that she held onto the wall beside her and slowly bent her knees. This body had been pampered for many years, receiving the most precious care from her parents. 7 days of injuries from the rod had drained all of her strength. She ordered herself to get up quickly and leave this place, but just as she took half a step with difficulty, her vision turned black and she fell towards the cold hard ground. Before she lost consciousness, she thought, "It's over. I've fallen head on. This time, my pretty face is going to be disfigured." A pair of hands reached out in time to support her and half pulled her into an embrace. Ning Shu moved the tip of her nose and vaguely recognized the familiar fragrance of Du Heng. Then she finally relaxed and allowed herself to faint. Xiahou Qing turned his face and frowned slightly. He asked Ju Sai, who was serving beside him, "Is it her?" Ju Sai stepped forward and removed a corner of the mask on Ning Shu's face. He nodded, yes. Why are you so much lighter? The sound of your footsteps is also shallow and weak. Xiahou Qing whispered. He held her steady with one hand and touched her forehead with the other. It was boiling hot. Chapter 253. Feeling the burning temperature under his palm, Xiahou Qing frowned even more and made a prompt decision: go back to the mansion and invite the best doctor in the capital. Yes. Ju Sai immediately waved his hand and ordered the guards to drive the carriage over. Seeing Xiahou Qing bend down and pick up Ning Shu, Ju Sai stepped forward and said, "Subordinate, come down." Xiahou Qing shook his head. "No, I'll do it. You can guide me." Except for Hui Mo and Ju Sai, who were close to him, he usually didn't like to be touched by others. But Ning Shu was the only one he didn't want to let others touch, not even Ju Sai. He couldn't see, so he could only judge whether the weather was good or gloomy by the degree of heat of the light shining on his body. He clearly felt that the sun in May disappeared. A gust of wind came from the sky. In the distance, people shouted in panic, "It's windy. Take back the things that are drying in the sun. Be careful not to be blown away by the wind." The slender girl in his arms was like the wind in May. She had barged into his life without warning, and her throat was almost broken by him. Because of his inexplicable hesitation, he released the hand that was pinching her soft neck. Then, they were entangled until now. He never knew what she looked like. He only felt that she was cunning and thick-skinned. Later, when they solved cases side by side and gradually became familiar with each other, he found that under her oily skin, there was a heart softer and firmer than anyone else. So, when he knew that she offended the Empress and was sent to prison, he suddenly came up with a solution. If she became the princess consort of the Nanping mansion, even if His Majesty didn't like it, he would let her out for the sake of the Nanping mansion. This idea was too fleeting. Even he didn't understand the reason. Emotion had defeated reason, and he ordered Hui Mo to sneak into the prison and pass it to her. This kind of impulse was unique in his calm, indifferent, and well-planned life. But the answer after the impulse was after gently placing Ning Shu on the soft cushion in the carriage, Xiahou Qing smiled faintly. He already knew. She didn't feel disappointed, but there was an inexplicable sense of relief. Her decision wasn't wrong. He was destined to die in this kind of life, so he shouldn't involve anyone else. The best ending was to stay away from them and forget about them. When Ning Shu woke up, it was already evening. She should have been fed some medicine, so she didn't feel dizzy. The injuries on her back were also much better. She had been cleaned and changed into clean underwear, exuding a faint medicinal fragrance. She raised her head and looked out of the window. The sky had been washed clean by the rain and was now clear and bright. Purple clouds filled the sky and dyed the gauze-like clouds. It was so beautiful that it was like being in a painting. Ning Shu stared in a daze for a long time before she heard the footsteps of a maidservant. "Miss has woken up. The meal has been prepared. Miss, please put on your clothes and move to the parlor." As expected of someone trained by Prince Nanping, this maidservant was also a woman of few words. After a simple explanation, she put down a stack of clean and tidy clothes and turned to leave. Ning Shu got up and walked over to unfold it. When she saw it, she was silent. It was actually a guard's uniform, the same as Juicy Hui's. The most amazing thing was that there was a pair of specially made shoes beside it. They looked the same on the outside, but when she looked inside, she found that there was something hidden inside. The heels were specially made high and thick, as if a stilt was stuffed inside. It mercilessly laughed at her for being short. Ning Shu looked at it for a long time speechlessly. She sighed and put it on. The thick shoes were very awkward to wear. Ning Shu walked around the room a few times before she got used to it. Under the guidance of the maidservant, she came to the parlor. Xiahou Qing was already waiting there. There was a very sumptuous meal on the table. Ning Shu's favorite food, dragon soup of the four seas, white jade fish balls, and sweet and sour shredded papaya. Without needing to get close, the aroma could be smelled. Ning Shu had been in prison for many days. When she saw these delicacies, There was only one word left in her mind: hunger. She couldn't even see Xiahou Qing next to her. Hearing Ning Shu's footsteps, Xiahou Qing lifted his chin slightly and said lightly, "The doctor said that you should wake up at this time." He was right. Juicy, add an extra reward. Her eyes moved from the delicacies to Xiahou Qing. Ning Shu's cheeks blushed slightly. "Thank you, Shizzy, for saving me again and finding a doctor to treat me." Before she could finish thanking him, Xiahou Qing raised his hand and interrupted her. "Juicy will pay the reward and the medical expenses first. Remember to pay him back when you recover." Ning Shu felt as though a bucket of cold water had been poured on her. Chapter 254. Ning Shu chuckled and said with a fake smile, "Your Highness is indeed as generous as before." Xiahou Qing did not take it seriously and said, "Judging from the strength of your clenched teeth, you have recovered most of your vitality. It seems that you can start working tonight." Ning Shu gathered her clothes and sat opposite Xiahou Qing. She blinked and asked, "What do you mean?" "I have already sent someone to tell Duke Ning that you have been safely released from prison and asked him not to worry too much. However, in order to prevent others from noticing, you can't return to the Duke's mansion for the time being. Since I'm lacking a personal bodyguard, you'll temporarily take over Huemo's position and stay in the Nanping mansion to serve me." This arrangement was reasonable, and she couldn't think of any reason to refuse. Ning Shu was so touched that she rolled her eyes. She picked up the jade chopsticks and pierced the fragrant and soft white jade fishball on the plate. Just as she was about to put it into her mouth, she suddenly stopped. "Then the food on the table, as well as my accommodation in the Nanping mansion for a period of time, won't I pay for it myself?" Although he couldn't see it, he could imagine how pleasing Ning Shu's gloomy expression was. Xiahou Qing was pleased, and a chuckle escaped from the bottom of his throat. "Don't worry, eat. This meal is what I promised you before. It's a reward for successfully solving the case. As for the accommodation, it will be paid with your salary." "Then I won't be polite," Ning Shu said perfunctorily and put the fishball into her mouth and began to devour it. After 2 big bowls of soup, Ning Shu was relieved. Like Xiahou Qing, she slowly chewed and swallowed. At the same time, she briefly explained to Xiahou Qing what had happened to her. After the meal, Xiahou Qing took the hot handkerchief that Juicy handed over. Behind him was the last trace of sunset. The hazy purple smoke made him look particularly otherworldly. He waved his hand and ordered the others to leave. He also ordered Ju Sai to guard around. After a moment of silence, he said, "So, His Majesty has a great suspicion of the Empress?" Ning Shu nodded. "Yes, so he used the matter of killing me to test her. It seems that there is a huge gap between the seemingly harmonious Emperor and Empress. The last 2 cases were the fuse of the explosion. And I accidentally became a small fish caught in the fire of the city gate. It was really sad. What kind of luck was this?" After self-mourning, Ning Shu quickly had a doubt. Logically, since Empress Cao can sit on the Phoenix chair for 25 years, she must have won His Majesty's heart. Where did this hostility come from? Sometimes, the person sitting on the throne is not determined by who that person is, but by what their surname is. You should know that 25 years ago, Empress Ju and the Ju family behind her were destroyed. And in that palace chaos that no one can explain, Empress Ju went crazy and killed her sister's son, who was the crown prince at the time. Then she set fire to herself, which indirectly facilitated His Majesty's ascension to the throne. And in that palace chaos, according to a few words that my father accidentally revealed, the Cao family made great contributions. So, this Phoenix seat can only have the surname Cao. Even if it is not this Empress Cao, it will be another. As for the hostility between them, I cannot speak without evidence. I can only make a guess." Xiahou Qing's voice was low and pleasant to the ear, like a faint zither. But under the gentle and low sound of the zither, there was a kind of unknown soul-stirring. "Have you heard of an old matter? A matter that no one dares to mention about the fight between the eldest and second sons in the womb?" Ning Shu lowered her eyebrows and carefully recalled. "I seem to have heard that His Majesty's eldest son is the 3rd prince, Xiao Yunyang. In fact, there were two other princes many years ago. But those two princes died suddenly when they were born. As for the inside story, I do not know. Xiahou Qing nodded and slowly said, the rumor is true. Those two princes did die suddenly when they were born. Because of this, His Majesty mourned for several months, so much so that he did not attend court. It was only when the third prince was born that things eased. As for the two eldest and second sons who died young, one of their birth mothers is the current Empress Cao, while the other was the one who was most doted on by His Majesty and grew up with His Majesty, concubine Jiang. Chapter 255. This was related to the secrets of the harem. Ning Shu's heart trembled. She put down her chopsticks and listened quietly. In the first year of Tianzi, His Majesty ascended the throne and sealed the 6 palaces. The first daughter of the Grand Tutor, Cao Shi, was the Empress. The second daughter of the Guanwen Hall's Grand Scholar, Jiang Shi, was the imperial concubine. The rest were Zhao Yi, beauties, and talents, all over 70. Ning Shu calculated with her fingers. At that time, His Majesty was in the prime of his life. He ascended the throne after the previous crown prince was killed by Empress Ju for no reason. 3 years without an heir, he must be under pressure and suspicion from all sides. He must be burning with anxiety. Yes. Under these circumstances, the imperial physician came to report that imperial concubine Jiang was pregnant. His Majesty's dragon heart was overjoyed, so he announced to the imperial harem, if imperial concubine Jiang gave birth to a prince, he would be conferred the title of crown prince. But coincidentally, 2 days later, Empress Cao also gave a pregnancy pulse. Something big is going to happen. Ning Shu reacted quickly and immediately thought of the crux of the problem, according to the imperial family's rule that the first wife is first, not the first wife. If Empress Cao gave birth to a prince, then regardless of whether the child in imperial concubine Jiang's womb was a boy or a girl, Empress Cao's son should be the crown prince. But the mistake was His Majesty's surprise promise. If one of the 2 imperial concubines was pregnant with a princess, then it would be fine. Otherwise, the imperial harem would be in chaos. The descendants of ordinary rich families could also fight for the family property, and some of them could even commit murder. She had solved several similar cases with her master when she was young, not to mention sitting on the throne of the country. That was the next emperor of Great Yu, the ruler of millions of people, and the son of the future Empress Dowager. It would be strange if nothing big happened. You guessed correctly. After the imperial physician took the pulse, they concluded that the 2 imperial concubines' wombs had the appearance of a dragon child. Thus, the imperial court fell into a fierce dispute. One side supported the rule set by the ancestors, and the other side said that His Majesty's words were golden. There was no reason for him to go back on his words. The 2 sides refused to give way to each other, and the dispute became more and more intense. His Majesty had a headache, so he finally made a decision: whichever of the 2 concubines gave birth to the eldest son would be the crown prince. Next, everyone's eyes fell on the 2 concubines' bellies. On the surface, everything seemed calm until the day of labor. Imperial concubine Jiang and Empress Cao gave birth one after the other, not even an hour apart. After a whole night of labor, the first to be carried to the delivery room was the Empress' legitimate son. Xiahou Qing's voice was as concise and plain as ever, but the shocking scenes hidden in his words made Ning Shu very curious. What happened after that? The emperor appointed the eldest son? But why did they die one after another? No one was appointed because the eldest son was found to be stillborn after he was born, and concubine Jiang's son was poisoned to death within 24 hours of his birth. Ning Shu took a deep breath. The 2 princes, who were highly anticipated by His Majesty, had caused such a big dispute. Who would have thought that it would end up like this? Ning Shu subconsciously covered her chest and asked in a low voice, who poisoned the second prince that imperial concubine Jiang gave birth to? Could it be Cao? She was too suspicious. Her own child was born to be stillborn, and she was heartbroken. How could she allow someone else's child to steal the position of crown prince? At first, imperial concubine Jiang's target was Empress Cao, But in the end, it was found that imperial concubine Jiang had poisoned herself. The reason was that in order to compete for the position of the eldest son, she used medicine to bring forward the time of labor. She didn't expect that the fetus would suffer from a deficiency. Imperial concubine Jiang simply poisoned Empress Cao to take the position of empress. After His Majesty knew the inside story, he banished imperial concubine Jiang to the cold palace, never to see the light of day again. After that, there was excessive grief, so much so that there was no funeral. After hearing this, Ning Xu's heart was in a daze. She couldn't help but sigh. No one would have thought that two women, who were at the peak of their power, would end up in such a state. Imperial concubine Jiang had been in the cold palace for 25 years, and even her name had been forgotten by the world. Empress Cao had not been able to conceive a child after that, so she could only choose someone else's child to be her weapon. Fate was indeed full of twists and turns, and it didn't follow the will of the people. The hostility between the emperor and empress had probably started from that matter. She thought for a moment and said, but imperial concubine Jiang deliberately used medicine to bring forward the time of labor. Why was the empress still one step ahead? Moreover, after the second prince was born, the imperial physicians should have quickly discovered his deficiency. Why did the imperial physicians only confess after the poison was discovered? Doesn't your highness feel that these 2 points are suspicious? Xiahou Qing picked up the teacup by his hand and took a sip. He slowly got up and walked to the window. Whether or not there are suspicions has already been decided. The truth of many things is not based on the matter, but on the person. The sunset behind him had already disappeared, and the deep blue and almost black night gradually appeared with starlight. The evening wind gently swept his ink-colored hair, flying into the wind. He raised his hand, and the few birds that had eaten their fill and were jumping around happily flapped their tender yellow wings and fought to land on the back of his hand and shoulder. Moreover, the matter from 20 years ago, those who knew the details either sealed their mouths or were unable to speak again. As for the specific truth, who can say for sure? Let's not pursue the past. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.